Good evening and welcome to the March 15, 2021 regular meeting of the Mayor and City Council. First item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm going to ask Council Member Neil Harris to lead us in the pledge tonight.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Neil. Next item on our agenda is reflection, and I'd like to call for a moment of silence, please. Thank you very much. Next item on our agenda is approval of minutes. Tonight we have one set of minutes to approve. It's from the regular meeting on March 1st. What is the pleasure of the council? Mike, and then Lorianne. Go ahead, Mike.
I'll move approval of the minutes from our regular session of March 1st, 2021.
Okay, Lorianne. Lorianne, I did not hear you. Say that a little bit. Perfect. Okay. Second. Okay. So I will call the roll. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Sesma.
Aye.
Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Councilmember Sales.
Aye.
And Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
All right, carries unanimously 5-0. Next on our agenda is appointments, and we have appointments to several committees. What is the pleasure of the council? Ryan.
Mr. Mayor, I move the resolution confirming reappointments made by you to the following committees. To the Environmental Affairs Committee for a 2-year term expiring on March 2023, Catherine Ryder. To the Planning Commission, a 5-year term expiring March 2026, Sharon Cantrell. To the Police Advisory Committee, a 2-year term to expire March 2023, Doug Wagner. And to the Transportation Committee, for a 2-year term to expire March 2023, Larry Seeger.
Neil.
Second.
All right. I will call the roll. All in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Sesma.
Aye.
Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Councilmember Sales.
Aye.
And Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
All right, carries unanimously, and we will thank all of these volunteers, as I always say, as all of us always say, when it comes to volunteering for one of our committees. It is a great way to serve your city. These committees provide valuable feedback and suggestions and recommendations to the mayor and council, and provide a good service. It's just a really good way to get to know the workings of the city and make your mark. So I hope everybody will consider that. Next, we're going to move on to presentations. And I'd like to call up everyone involved with the Ad Hoc Mayor and Council Compensation Review Committee. Kim Yocklin, our Director of Human Resources, Brian Epstein, Marvin Lynch, and other committee members. Welcome, committee members. Is Kim with us tonight?
I am, Judd. Good evening, Mayor Ashman and City Council members. I'm Kim Yocklin, and I had the pleasure of being the staff liaison to the 2020 Ad Hoc Mayor and Council Compensation Review Committee. In addition to myself, the 6 members of the committee are also joining us this evening. And at this time, I will turn it over to co-chairs Brian Epstein and Marvin Lynch to present the committee's final report and recommendations.
Good evening, Mayor Ashman and Council, City Council. We want to get right into the presentation. Brian Epstein and I will be sharing the background of the committee as well as the findings as a result of our deliberations, analysis, so forth. The legal background, let's go to slide 19. Thank you. The legal background, Section 5 of the city charter establishes the salary and benefits of the city council members, provides for small periodic adjustments of those amounts. And Section 5A of the charter provides for the mayor and council to appoint an advisory committee every 4 years to review the compensation and benefits of the mayor and council and to make recommendations whether any adjustments should be made. And for the benefit of mainly the residents who may be viewing this right now, as I know the council already knows that the ad hoc committee's recommendations are purely advisory in nature. They're entirely non-binding, but we get to do the legwork, if you will, to see whether or not there needs to be any changes. Could I have slide 20? For some general background, the mayor and city council's salaries are listed. The mayor, $30,846. Council members, $24,676. They're adjusted annually, the salaries, if the city employees receive an increase. It's either $500, the lesser of $500, or the increase in the consumer price index, the CPI, for the Washington metropolitan region, November 1st versus the preceding November, that time span. Also, regarding mayor and city council benefits available to mayor and council members, medical, dental, vision, the long-term care package, life, accidental death, and dismemberment. Yeah, the official pays 100% of premium costs. However, each receives an annual $4,346 stipend towards the purchase of these benefits. And if these benefits aren't, the stipend doesn't go towards these available benefits, then these funds are credited to the city retirement plan. Could I have page 21? One of the other, before we get to the recommendations for the council and mayor, one of the other charges of our committee was to look at the boards, commissions, and committee stipends. There's approximately 20 active appointed bodies. We just heard that there were some new people that were appointed to some of the commissions or boards tonight. And stipends are provided only to the members of 3 of these bodies: the Planning Commission, Board of Appeals, and the Historic District Commission. The reasons I think behind it relate to the complexities of their issues, as well as the amount of time that they really have to expend in doing a good job in those particular areas. The stipends are small amounts though, $3,000 for the Planning Commission, $1,500 for both the Appeals and Historic District Commission members. This is our first recommendation related to these particular committees and commissions. We're seeing that because they're in the general rule is for that such boards, commissions locally, regionally, nationally actually have very nominal or no compensation attached to them, that the ad hoc committee recommends no changes to these stipends. So I'm going to pass the baton on to Brian Epstein, who's going to speak to the recommendations related to the mayor and council compensation.
Thank you, Marvin. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Next slide, please. General analytics and fairness were the key drivers of our analysis. Staff did provide data for a variety of municipalities, both locally and nationally. The size of the population of each jurisdiction and some detail on the structure of the local governments were provided. The approaches to compensation vary significantly. As an example, Gaithersburg has a robust infrastructure, including its own police force. That is not necessarily the case elsewhere. There are other differences as well, a myriad of differences. We also reviewed the salary increase process for Gaithersburg employees with Kim's assistance. For example, I believe for this past year, there was a 1.5% increase, consumer price index base, but no additional merit beyond that. The committee concluded that the city of Rockville, our neighbor, is the best comparator. Obviously close by, nearly identical populations, similar services, development and planning demands. And if you include the stipend that was mentioned earlier, the roughly $4,300, the salaries are essentially identical. The committee also surveyed the mayor and council regarding their monthly hours dedicated to city matters. Obviously, the time spent at these meetings and a variety of other efforts, both in person, remote, etc. Needless to say, the committee was impressed by the amount of time each of you dedicate to serving the city, and that's very much appreciated. The hours devoted, and they certainly range, I think, from month to month and from person to person, but often 1/3 of an FTE full-time equivalent, in some cases even over a half at times. So definitely a significant level of effort. The committee also observed that the current annual adjustment measure, the CPI increase or $500, provides no assurance against effective salary decreases in any given year. And by decrease, I mean if the CPI were to go up by a factor of, say, more than 2%, which is more, 2% of the 24,000 and change for the council salary, that you could in a higher inflation environment, not that we're in one, could have an effective decrease. So we reviewed that factor closely as well. Overall, with all these factors I've gone over here this evening, I think I can say with confidence that compensation analysis, be it for a governmental entity like this, or even more generally, is certainly a blend of art and science. Next slide, please. So we're not recommending a increase to the salary, and I think there's another little blurb at the bottom here. There's also no recommendation. Sorry, the increase we're recommending would be to give a little bit of an increase above the consumer price index, and that should scroll onto the slide here at some point. That's in my copy. This 1.1% and above the CPI would provide for an enhancement that year over year would follow with the CPI, just with the addition of the extra 1%.
Brian, go to the next slide, because that has the explanation. There you go.
Okay. Yep. Oh, sorry. This got broken out into two slides. For comparison, the 2019 report indicates that mayor compensation was $34,500 and council member compensation at $28,000. This provides they provide for a yearly adjustment based on the CPI, but importantly, no increase for fiscal year 2021, which they're in currently. As noted earlier this evening, the mayor's compensation currently is $30,846. Council member compensation is $24,676. So you add the $4,346 stipend that we also reviewed, and you can see, this is essentially in lockstep with that. With that stipend, that would be $35,192, and council members at $29,022, slightly ahead based on our calculations of Rockville, but admittedly, we have data from Rockville from 2019. While we know that for 21, there's no increase, I do think there could be, or we think there could be another 1 to 2% in those Rockville figures. We weren't able to confirm that for sure.
Brian, if I may, the heart of the matter in terms of the base salary adjustment is in this current slide, which is the packet page 24. So in essence, what we're recommending is removing the $500 cap on the annual adjustment, because as Brian said, that could result in an actual decrease in the mayor and council salaries in any given year. So we want to ensure that there's no decrease. And the way we do that is by saying that, provided, of course, that the city employees receive a salary adjustment, and only if the city employees receive a salary adjustment, then the mayor and the city council will get the CPI. And then we decided to add on to that 1% more, in recognition of really the extraordinary number of hours that we found when we asked for a survey from the members of the council and the mayor, who are putting in, ranging in any given month from 50 to 130 hours per month, month after month. And we thought that there should be both public awareness of that, the extraordinary level of effort that's required of council members, far more than, participating in a council meeting on Monday nights, and some recognition of that. And that sort of nominal recognition is embedded in that 1% increase.
Yeah, thank you, Sheldon. Right. So instead of really doing an overall increase, which has happened in the past, this is I think a simplified method for the CPI with this modest 1% enhancement. In essence, taking into account all these factors discussed here this evening as additional compensation. Next slide, please. As noted earlier, we also, the $4,300 stipend, this is a little bit of an outdated copy with the 4,000. That number's been in place now for, I think, since 2018, and is reviewed, I believe, every 4 years, based on the increase in benefits costs for the city employees more generally. Our guiding principle here is to offer flexibility. Right now, it's basically mandated. In addition to the compensation offered, without any choice, you either take benefits or you get this additional retirement contribution, which is our understanding is that's how most use it. There certainly are significant retirement benefits, tax savings to contributing it to your 457 that way. That said, it shouldn't have to be a given. We felt it important that folks be provided the flexibility, given their own personal financial situations or financial goals, to have additional latitude to just take that additional money as extra compensation. Administratively, this could literally be added to certain people's salaries if that election were made. If more administratively feasible, it could literally be just an extra payment. It would be taxable, be tracked on a 1099 or other appropriate reporting. But net, we believe there's no downside to this. If you like the way things are structured currently, that could stay just the same. But for anyone who felt that more flexibility was needed and they wanted to, quote unquote, take that money home, that should be an option as well. And that is the end of our official presentation, and we open the floor up to general questions or comment.
So first off, I want to say thank you to you, Brian and Marvin, and to all the Sheldon, all the members of our volunteer committee here, and to Kim for working with everybody, Joyce. This is something that's in the charter, and it's obviously a little bit touchy for and uncomfortable for mayor and council just to initiate a discussion and say, hey, we're gonna get a raise, or hey, we're not, whatever. It's one of these strange things about being in local government, that you have to deal with this. And so you guys taking it off our plate is very, very much appreciated. And we also appreciate that you guys clearly put a lot of thought into this and did a lot of homework to come up with these recommendations. And so thank you. And I want to open it up to council. I certainly think, frankly, I think your recommendations are fine. I think that the one about the $4,300 stipend makes a lot of sense. It's absolutely no difference in terms of financial commitment from the city. But let's hear what council members have to say. I saw Mike's hand go up first. Let's go to Mike.
Yeah, I just want to thank the committee for their their recommendations and their astute analysis of our compensation in comparison to other municipalities. I think that was thoughtful. I guess the one thing I want to make sure is that everybody understands that if the council accepts these recommendations, they don't go into effect immediately. They would have to wait until after the next election, I believe, correct?
That's right.
That is correct. Anyone else have any Rob Wu?
Thanks, Mayor. Just a quick question, and thank you all for your time and the effort that you put into it. It's very much appreciated. The question I had is, did you give any consideration to in tying the mayor and council's adjustments annually and to CPI plus 1%, situations where perhaps, leaner years where city employees get like a 0.5% or percent, where the council would then be getting it would be triggered, the increase would be triggered because there would be an adjustment to the employee salaries, but the mayor and council would in fact be receiving a adjustment higher than what city employees would be getting. Was there any consideration to addressing that kind of situation?
Well, I think two thoughts about that, Councilmember Wu. One is, of course, we require that the city's employees receive an adjustment in a given year. So if there's no adjustment for city employees, there's no adjustment for you. In the scenario you're talking about, where the city provides an adjustment, but it's less than the CPI. Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, that is a tough one.
For example, at CPI. So if you're a federal employee for the past half a decade, actually, 2009 through about 2014, we were getting about 1%. And so in that situation, if the city manager were to grant compensation at CPI of 1%, mayor and council would be getting 2% CPI plus 1%.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, one thing that went through my mind is, and I know that, city salaries, vary a great deal, but from a taxpayer standpoint, when I think about the fact that, say, a council member who's putting in 75 hours a month and receives $24,000 for that, 1% is $240. So it's pretty nominal, in absolute terms. You're right. I mean, in the odd situation where there is the sort of disparity you're talking about, what would the disparity be? It'd be $200, $240. Now, the mayor would get a princely $300. But, there's always the option in that situation, Robert, and as you know, the charter allows you not to take any such increase. So if Tanisha was in a situation where all she could afford to give was 1%, you on an individual basis and all the other members of the council member could also say, well, we're not taking any more than that either. So that's an option that the charter section, I don't know whether it's 5 or 5A, one of those two sections provides for that. So
yeah, and I'll add to that, Sheldon, that I know that there's also a merit increase process. I know that was on hold. Obviously, it's a bit of a unique budgetary environment with COVID, et cetera. But as Sheldon was saying, I mean, there is the ability to override this. I think the optics do matter. I mean, especially as these numbers become more divergent. And ultimately, this is to codify through process a CPI plus 1, but especially for unusual circumstances, there always would be latitude to address that in an appropriate manner.
We'll go to Neil.
Okay, so I'll try to be less inclined to overcomplicate things. Typically, the employees get a CPI plus a merit which is usually several percent on top of the CPI. Is that correct? Kim probably knows the answer.
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
Okay, so if there was a situation where the mayor and council was getting CPI +1 and the staff was getting CPI +2 or 3, that's a normal scenario. So
Right.
I'm not really worried about this situation or the optics. Two things. One, as was just said, we can always decide 1 year if budget is tight not to take the increase. And two, this plan is going to get revisited in 4 more years anyway. So I don't think we're likely to run into major heartburn in the next 4 years. Let's see how it works out. Seems very reasonable. And thank you again for all the hard work. It's much appreciated. And it's better you than us.
Well, speaking of hard work, we'd be remiss not to say that we made some very extensive data requests, which are reflected in the final result, but you don't actually see them, from Kim, and she was excellent, really diligent in responding to those requests and in supporting the committee. We felt very, very well supported by Kim. We want to recognize that.
Thank you, Sheldon. We appreciate that. We appreciate Kim just like you do, for many, many reasons. Do we have any other comments from the council? All right. Not seeing any. Tanisha, were you looking for sort of any formal guidance from us? What do you want from us here?
I think I think the next step is that the resolution would come forward, and you can jump in there if there is.
Or the charter
consensus.
amendment?
Yeah, for the charter amendment.
This would be a charter amendment, so it would be done by resolution, but we would go through our typical procedure where there would be an introduction, then a public hearing, then policy discussion. So I guess we're looking for direction if you want us to go ahead and initiate that process in accordance with the committee's recommendations.
Okay, do you need a vote on that, Lynn, or can you just have nodding of heads?
I think nodding of heads is sufficient.
Okay, I see at least 3 heads nodding here. More, okay. All right, Compensation Review Committee, thank you so much for your work. And there are other volunteer opportunities, and we'd love to get you guys involved in other stuff because it's gonna be 4 years before you get to do this again. So consider it, but just you have our gratitude for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so next we're going to move on to our mid-session legislative review, and I'd like to invite our tech team to bring up Jess Kwasny, our legislative affairs manager, and Barbara Zeptic, our lobbyist. And it's going to take a minute to transition everybody. Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, thank you so much.
Jess, you're looking sideways to me. Okay, now that's better.
Okay, there you go. How are you?
All right, welcome. Take it away.
Good, thank you. So good evening, Mayor and City Council members. I'm Jess Kwasny, the Legislative Affairs Manager for the City of Gaithersburg, and I'm joined tonight by the President of Z&E, Barbara Zeptic, who represents the city's legislative and advocacy efforts in Annapolis. We're here tonight, as you said, to provide the 2021 General Assembly mid-session review. As I've said in several emails before, the 442nd Maryland General Assembly convened on Wednesday, January 13th, and we're now just 1 week away from crossover. So even though this has been a challenging General Assembly session because of the COVID pandemic and the General Assembly having to be conducted remotely, it's really flown by. As I said, we're close to crossover. There's been challenges, like I said, and also some positive outcomes like being able to submit testimony online. But we're just going to quickly tonight go through the 2021 policy priorities that the Mayor and City Council approved on November 16th. For those watching online, the priorities do provide a framework to guide the city's advocacy efforts throughout the year. While the past years differed from ones in previous years in many ways, at the center, the policy priorities do reflect the city's longstanding commitment to secure and maintain the necessary resources for the city to continue to proactively plan, prepare, and respond to keep residents and visitors safe and healthy. So the first one is one that you see every year. It's the permanent restoration of municipal highway user revenue. For over a decade, the city has joined the Maryland Municipal League in support of a bill that would fully restore highway user revenues. It's a critical program for the city because it provides necessary resources to plan and deliver road maintenance and improvement projects. This year, the bill was House Bill 649, Senate Bill 362, and it does increase the share of funds from the gas tax that MDOT provides annually to local governments through transportation grants. It also would eliminate the sunset provision on the current level of municipal highway user revenues, which would occur and is set to occur at fiscal year 2024. It did differ a little bit this year. It did remove the lockbox provision that was included last year, and it doesn't tie local transportation funding to the consumer price index. At the start of session, there was some optimism that the bill would get traction and pass this year. Last year, it did fall short because the session ended early, but it looked likely that the bill would pass. However, as the session has progressed this session, I think it's facing more of an uphill battle at this point. The forecast for the transportation fund is less reliable right now for two reasons. The gas tax has decreased due to less travel because of the COVID pandemic. And I think there's this belief that there will be an increase in electric vehicles and that use. So that will impact the funding that goes in, the revenue that goes into that fund. However, Barbara does have some recent updates that she will provide to you during her part of the agenda on some things that may happen at, towards the end of session with transportation funding. The second priority is preserve local authority and access to technology. In past sessions, as you know, the city has supported efforts to ensure affordable, reliable, high quality broadband service for all Maryland residents and communities. And yet years of modernization efforts in Maryland, they have not fully reached the potential that we could, but the COVID pandemic exposed many of the failures of our digital infrastructure to meet the demands of the new normal. So the city, as well as the state, the city supported several bills to address the digital divide, and the General Assembly introduced several bills. We've been monitoring all of the bills, particularly any bills that could infringe on our ability to preserve net neutrality or weaken the city's ability to protect and maintain our right-of-way, or the ability to charge fees for infrastructure installation and deployment. But the city, and while we fully support advancements in technology, we do oppose bills that would take any effort away from state or federal local authority to narrow the ability of local governments to oversee certain wireless facility modifications and fee authorizations, or regulations that would impede us from exercising land use and design authority. We feel that local governments must retain our authority, and it helps preserve the integrity of our neighborhoods. So we felt that supporting an overall bill, Senate Bill 824, House Bill 1328, which is the Building Out Broadband Act of 2021, does strike the right balance to move the state forward, but also preserves and helps retain authority for local governments. So this bill would create the Maryland Digital Connectivity Fund, and that is currently, unless the bill passes, formally the Rural Broadband Assistance Fund. This bill would focus that fund to the state as a whole, and the fund would be used to assist in the establishment and expansion of affordable broadband communications services across the state. It also authorizes the fund to be used to provide grants to authorities to expand high-speed internet access in underserved areas of the state. But it also provides funding for any fees that would be charged by MDOT or local government for joint trenching. And it also has procedures for dispersing money from the fund. There are also regulations that would need to be adopted for procedures for any of the authorities to apply for the financial assistance and for allocating, selecting, and distributing the funds. It also does allow a county, and this is the most important part, the best for last, the bill allows a county or a municipal corporation to adopt in an ordinance or resolution appropriate policies to advance progress of infrastructure, equipment, and systems needed to extend broadband access in underserved areas, including the waiving of certain fees and other specified actions. So I think the bill was very careful overall to ensure that local governments have the ability to provide input in the regulation part of this bill, as well as the ability to adopt certain ordinances if we would like to. So that's just one of the bills that we've been monitoring, but like I said, provides a good balance, I think, for expanding access, but retaining that local authority. The third policy that we have for the city is to preserve and protect local revenue streams. There were dozens of bills this session that were designed to provide financial relief to Marylanders, small businesses across the state. Unfortunately, many of these well-intentioned bills did target important revenues that local governments depend on at a time, obviously, when our expenditures have increased and revenues have gone down. So we felt it was even more essential to ensure that the city has a fair and equitable ability to preserve and protect our existing revenues. So we did have to oppose some of these bills. Many of them sought to terminate or cap credits for the enterprise zone tax credit program, and others sought to prohibit local governments from imposing various admissions and amusement tax. We did submit testimony on behalf of the mayor for House Bill 1079 as an example that would prohibit a county or a municipal corporation from imposing the admissions and amusement tax on gross receipts, but those would be only charges for an activity that promotes health or physical well-being. So we did a little bit of research and dug into what that would mean for the city because it would be a permanent prohibition on those revenues. And so for instance, in FY16, just from the tax promoting health and wellness and physical well-being alone was $193,000 in FY16 and $82,000 in FY20 alone. So again, it would have been a decrease in that revenue that we need. So most of these bills that I've discussed so far are bills that have had a hearing, but they've not had a final vote in committee. And because we're getting close to crossover, that could be a sign that they're going to stay in that committee or they're kind of waiting to see what the other chamber passes. But we will continue to provide updates after crossover on the fate of all of those bills. But Barbara is going to take it over from here for a little bit to talk about one of the bills that we've been working very hard to discuss, which is Senate Bill 536, and just a quick update on the stormwater bill and where we are with that.
Yeah, just really quickly. First of all, thank you so much for having me back. Barbara Zaktic with ZNC, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. It's a pleasure to be in front of you again. I just want to quickly echo Jess's sentiments that this has been a very bizarre session. It's been very unique in many, many ways, and we really appreciate you, Mr. Mayor, and you members of the council for all of your involvement this session, because it has been a unique one, to say the least, and having your support and your help in working on these issues has been tremendous. So thank you. One of the most unique things, obviously, our ability to interact with legislators is not quite as strong as it was when we can stalk them in the halls as we normally do in prior sessions, and we will in the future. One of the interesting aspects that I don't think I personally took into account in advance was our, other advocates as well also have issues reaching their legislators and so forth. So we've been doing a lot of work this session, and so thank you for your cooperation with that. Real quick, Senate Bill 536. This was Senator King's bill as drafted to prevent Montgomery County from collecting stormwater remediation charges from agricultural exhibitions fairgrounds. We did talk to the senator over the interim about this bill, and as put in, and the reason I'm saying it as put in, it would just the county, but of course it's Gaithersburg that collects those funds and not the county. So once the bill was amended to address it for Gaithersburg, General Legislative Services realized that we had a legal issue. You can't violate municipal home rule by targeting just one municipality. So that's where the bill stands now. The bill is in the Senate EHE Committee, Environment, Health, and Education Committee. It's being held currently. We have a week until crossover. There is a possibility that Senator King does amend the bill, present amendments that make that bill apply to all municipalities. At least that's the only path forward for this legislation. So we're watching it closely. But in general, for local revenue collection, given this strange environment, not only from a legislative standpoint, but also from revenues and the impact of our economy, we're doing okay. I'll turn it back over to Jess.
Thank you, Barbara. And Barbara has been amazing this General Assembly session, especially not being able to be in Annapolis. I can't believe that we've been able to impact and get some of the things done that we've been able to this session. And Barbara has certainly been a huge part of that. The fourth policy priority is the COVID-19 relief for small businesses and nonprofit organizations. Earlier in session, I did provide a update on the larger bill that was the bipartisan bill and the governor's bill that they came together to pass that would provide relief for residents as well as small businesses. But we have been able to provide support for a few bills that do impact, that have been impacted by the pandemic. As we know, small businesses and nonprofit organizations are vital, and it's been really important to ensure that we've helped secure financial relief during the legislative session. Some small businesses, small businesses need additional assistance as relief funding expires, and they continue to struggle. I do know that the county is going to or has passed some of the new occupancy restrictions, so that will help some. Nonprofits are also particularly vulnerable because their funding structures rely on grants. Nonprofits also include arts and humanities organizations and often in our overlooked subsection. And so we do have some general assemblies, including our own Senator Kagan, that really pays close attention to these issues for nonprofits. So we supported HB 310 and Senate Bill 323 this year, which will establish the Maryland Arts Capital Grant Program and would require the governor to provide $3 million in grant funding for FY 2023 through 2028. And another example of a bill that we support would be SB 711, the Growing Family Childcare Opportunities Pilot Program. It would establish a private pilot program to provide grants to local jurisdictions or childcare licensing regions to ensure supply and ensure the stability of family childcare providers in areas with above average poverty rates and unemployment. And grant recipients would be able to establish their own program, which would they would have to make sure that it was in a low income area, raise some funds to match the grants, and then continue to be able to provide that funding after the grant runs out. But it is a great step to ensure that while folks are still at home, that families are able to get back to work and make sure that their children are well taken care of, but also provides that incentive to have businesses here and small businesses in the city. So I did want to move on. Barbara's going to go back. I'm going to go back to Barbara, and she's going to take over for the last two priorities. And then I thought we would finish up the night to provide just a few updates on some of the larger issues that have been before the General Assembly that we've been tracking and following for the mayor and city council.
So for moving our community, Jess already talked a little bit about the highway user revenue legislation. The other very significant transportation funding bill that's before the General Assembly this session is the Transit Safety and Investment Act, which ensures that MTA continues to give funding not only on the operating budget, but also in the capital budget at increasing thresholds for the next several years. And so this has been at the forefront of leadership's mind for the last couple of years. And so it's kind of been a while in the making, and it has been anticipated to pass. It is of note that it does apply to MARC. I want to make sure it's clear that this isn't just about Maryland Transit Administration in the Baltimore area. And in fact, Senator Zucker is a co-sponsor in the Senate and made a point to express that in the bill hearing, that this is very important for MARC funding to make sure that is kept in a good state of repair moving forward. When the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee met to vote on this, as well as the Highway User Revenue Bill, we heard an interesting, Senator Chairman Gazone said that they were holding those bills for later in the session because they want to explore transportation revenues that flow into the Transportation Trust Fund. So look at that as somewhat of a teaser. I hadn't heard anything about that previously, and I texted him immediately. I said, finally, we're going to do something exciting this for the budget this session. But it's still a possibility later this session, even after crossover, that we see leadership focusing on funding that goes into that Transportation Trust Fund. And I think because of the reasons that Jess mentioned earlier, because we see the gas tax revenues decline. And so that feeds into both of that MTA funding bill as well as the highway user conversation. Now on the transit funding bill, it has passed out of committee in appropriations in the House. Again, the Senate has been holding on to those bills. The Senate does have it on their voting list for tomorrow. So we'll see what happens, but that should be interesting for later on in session. I'm looking at the agenda. Okay, now we're going to talk about your legislative bond initiative request for the construction of the pedestrian bridge at Great Seneca Highway. So this was a request for $250,000 as part of a public-private partnership to help facilitate construction of the bridge. We worked very closely with Senator Kagan in the Senate and with your delegation in the House to make sure that this was put in time. It was submitted by Delegate Gilchrist in the House. We know that the Capital Subcommittee of the House, which has the budget first this year, is going to be voting on these legislative bond initiatives on Wednesday. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that there. There have not been a ton of legislative bond initiative requests this session, so that bodes well. And of course, the capital funding is not taking any hit this year because of the economy or anything else. So it's a good environment for a legislative bond initiative. So we'll see what happens on Wednesday. Unfortunately, unlike any other session, because of the unique virtual nature, there were not hearings on the legislative bond initiative this year. So we put in all the information requested, and we continue to talk to our friends, and we hope to see good news on Wednesday, and we'll keep you posted on that. So that brings me to the budget. The budget, frankly, between us and everybody watching, was probably the least exciting thing to happen this session, and it was a wonderful reprieve. Honestly, the revenue estimates that came in December from the Bureau of Revenue Estimates were not nearly as bad as I think people originally thought that they might be. And of course, with all the federal funding coming in, that's really kept the state much more afloat than people feared several months ago. So we're in a pretty good position. I think the state has tapped into some of the rainy day funds, but the state had 7% restricted before, so it went down to 5%. So we're really not in a bad state fiscally. As the governor's proposed budget came forth, there weren't any cuts to local government funding formulas, so that was good news. There was a little bit of stuff to the counties, but nothing for the municipalities, so that was good. And we haven't seen any indication of that moving forward. Actually, today, the House Appropriations Committee took up its first decisions on the operating budget. And again, we didn't see anything that anyone has to be concerned about. I think most noteworthy for Gaithersburg, what happened today, the House Appropriations did put in budget language, and this is budget language, so it's a little bit nerdy, but it doesn't have to deal with, exactly the budget where the money goes. But they are withholding $1 million from the Maryland Department of Health until they issue a report on the state of having a COVID-19 vaccine site in Montgomery County. I know that's a big issue that there isn't a site in Montgomery County, it being the most populous county in the state. And so that report is due by July 1 by the Department of Health. And so, I mean, and now that budget obviously goes to the Senate. We'll see if they keep that budget language, but I would be surprised if they took it out. So that's really the most interesting thing in the budget, I think, for Gaithersburg, which is very good news for you. Let's see. Jess, you want to do police reform, and I'll come back to Kerwin.
Sure.
All right.
So like I said, there were a few issues that we tracked for the mayor and city council this session. I'm going to start really quickly with a climate change update. As we know, Senate Bill 414, which was Senator Penske's bill, it's the Climate Solutions Now. It did pass the Senate last week. As amended, there is a provision which could adversely affect local governments and their revenues from personal property taxes. The bill on the Senate side does establish that personal property is exempt from county or municipal corporation property tax if the property is machinery or equipment that, one, is installed on rooftops, parking lots, roadways, or brownfield sites, and two, is part of a community solar energy generating system that serves more than 51% of kilowatt hour output to low or moderate income customers. The House, the Environment and Transportation Committee did have a bill hearing. The bill on the Senate side, on the House side, is still in the Environment Subcommittee. They have not taken the bill up yet, so I don't know if that means they're just going to wait for the Senate's bill and then use that as the vehicle to pass some type of climate solution. But they only have a little bit of time to get that to the floor and passed over to the Senate this week. So we'll see what happens there. They will take up the Senate bill, so we will continue to keep Delegate Gilchrist informed of any of the city's concerns with the changes that they made to the Senate. And he is very amenable to listening to our concerns and helping us get through those. The next update is a really quick update I will provide on the police reform and accountability. As you may have heard in the news, the Senate did give final approval to a package of 9 different police reforms the first week of March. 6 of the bills, actually of the 9, passed unanimously. And those included funding for mental health counseling to police officers, ensuring the state's attorney automatically investigates police-involved deaths. It blocks police departments from obtaining military-grade equipment. And then a few things with Baltimore City Police Department and giving control back to the city, back control of their police department. And then there's some ban on no-knock warrants. The other 3 bills were not unanimous, and there were some difficult and lengthy debates on the bills, but at the end, 3 bills did pass. 1 makes police disciplinary records publicly available. Senator Kagan did vote against that bill. They passed a bill that would repeal parts of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, and there are a bill that updates the laws on the use of force policies. And then last week, the House passed Speaker Jones' bill, which was the big omnibus Police Accountability Act of 2021. So the House side, well, there were other individual bills. They really put all of the things that they'd like to see pass in this one bill. It was heavily amended. It does limit the use of no-knock warrants. It creates a standardized statewide use of force statute. It grants new powers to the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission. It requires the use of body-worn cameras by 2025, which was one of the issues that MML was really focusing on because of the funding requirements, its unfunded mandate, and ensuring that municipalities are able to have body-worn cameras up and running by 2025 was better than some of the other bills that would have required it by 2022 or 2023. It also requires an independent agency to investigate use of force that leads to a death or an injury or serious bodily injury. It does create a new process for police discipline, including an administrative charging committee and a trial board. And they also have to include civilian members. And it does require the creation of police accountability boards in each jurisdiction. The board in each jurisdiction cannot include police officers, and would receive civilian complaints and oversight over police discipline. So now that these bills have passed, they'll go to the opposite chamber. I would assume they'll take those bills up, but at the end of the day, the bills are going to go to conference before anything is passed, before sine die. So we will continue to provide updates on what the final package looks like that they're able to get agreement on both the House and the Senate side. And so I think, was that, yep, climate change police reform. And so I'm going to let Barbara finish up our presentation with a few updates about Kerwin.
Yeah, just to wrap it up real quickly, as I'm sure you all know, the General Assembly did override the governor's veto on the Kerwin legislation, as well as the governor's veto on the digital ad tax legislation to fund it. So they are moving forward with that today. They did have a hearing, and we anticipate this to move forward. Legislation for Kerwin 2.0 is what they call it, and that will delay implementation of a lot of the requirements in the Kerwin legislation for 1 year. And that's basically to address delays related to COVID and the fact that schools haven't even really been open for students in person. So that's a nice reprieve for the school systems. I did forget to mention the governor's 2 supplemental budgets previously when I talked about the budget. The governor's original proposed budget did not factor in the December COVID relief from the federal government. So that's what those supplementals do. They also provide some flexibility with how the education funding, the blueprint funding is used. There's a little bit more flexibility for using it to address issues with the pandemic for this 1 year only. So we are seeing some of that as well. But that's, I think, pretty much it. We do not anticipate to see significant other tax increases. There has been a lot of tax reform legislation on the table, but I think the general climate of the General Assembly this year is that people have suffered enough. Let's not put more suffering on any businesses. But you know, you never know what we're going to see. So we'll see what happens. We'll continue to keep an eye on things. Again, thank you so much for your time. I know we've taken quite a bit of it this evening, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right. Thank you both for the very comprehensive report. Really appreciate it and appreciate all of your work. I do want to just take a quick moment to recognize you, Senator Kagan's come up a couple times in both of your narratives, and you know, having worked quite a bit on Senate Bill 536, Cheryl has been sort of really a rock star in staying in touch and keeping us posted and representing the city's interests on this important matter. So I just want to give her a shout out, and I want to open it up to any questions or comments from the council. Not seeing any. Okay. Oh, I see Neil. Let's go to Neil.
Well, I was going to wait until we had gone through the Annapolis report and ask about something that's a little farther afield down in our friends in Washington, D.C. Regarding the COVID funding bill that was passed and the amount of funding going to each municipality. And it seemed like based on the size of Gaithersburg, we didn't nearly get as much of a share of that funding as others. Do we have any update on whether that imbalance might be being adjusted or rectified?
What I can say, and Tanisha certainly weigh in, Dennis, Tom, Tanisha and I have been really on top of this, as well as Ryan, our Councilmember Spiegel and Mayor Ashman have been in touch with Congressman Trone and his staff, as well as Senator Van Hollen and Senator Cardin, working to kind of find out why those things happen, what the funding formulas looked like and why they were used that way. At the end of the day, there is the imbalance and there is the discrepancy, and the bill is signed into law. So at this point right now, we do know that there are other localities across Maryland as well as across the country that have seen the same inequities in the funding. So we're going to have to work with the Department of Treasury, I think, to find out. What we've heard is that those estimates they're rough estimates and will change. I'm not sure if they'll change much, but we are looking at working with some of our municipalities that have been impacted differently as well on how we can do some advocacy outreach on those issues. But that's really the only update that I have, is that they're the inequities. We're not quite sure why they did the funding formulas they did, and that we're going to continue trying to dig into it and work with Maryland delegation to find out what's going on.
Okay, and just for the benefit of the viewing public here, what some of the things we're looking at is some municipalities that are much smaller than us. We have a population of about 70,000. Some municipalities that are more like 20,000 people got 50% more money out of COVID relief than we did and things like that. So it really seems like the numbers are out of balance. And our formula was different from a lot of them because of the higher poverty rate in Gaithersburg, and yet we got less, not more. It seems peculiar. So I'll be looking forward to your updates. Thanks.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Okay, not seeing anybody. I will thank you both, and we'll move on with our agenda.
Thank you.
And appreciate all of your work. Next on our agenda, we have our fiscal year 2022 online budget forum survey results, and I'd like to ask the tech team to bring up Nate Bassett, our senior budget analyst, to lead us through the results. And we have Janice Hartman too. Janice, welcome. Welcome, Nate. Nate, you are on mute.
Sorry about that. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Nathan Bassett. I'm the city's senior budget analyst. I'm here tonight to present the online budget forum survey results for the 2022 budget year. Oh, can the tech team bring up the slides, please? Okay, and I've already given my intro, so we can go to the next slide, please. The survey opened online on January 4th and closed on January 31st, offering constituents a 4-week time period to provide input on the FY22 budget. The city conducted the survey through SurveyMonkey and announced the survey through various outlets, including the city's website, email newsletters, social media, and through as many other partners as possible, thanks to the efforts of the Community and Public Relations Department. The survey contained 11 questions, which included the standard 7 questions about budget priorities, communications preferences, and an open-ended question, with 4 additional questions about demographics that have not been previously included. Their inclusion is part of an effort to identify which parts of the community participated and where additional efforts could be focused to get further feedback from people in the city in the future. Next slide, please. 215 respondents completed the survey this year, in comparison to 387 responses for FY21 and 435 in 2019. The decrease in responses is attributable to Constant Contact's unsubscribe feature that defaults to an unsubscribe to all selection, combined with recipients receiving an email that is unrelated to the one that they signed up for. We decided not to issue a survey-only blast to all subscribers of city newsletters, so as not to risk unsubscribing rates to other department email lists increasing. Instead, we issued it to the weekly newsletter list and asked several other newsletters to include the link in their own mailings. Last year, the direct survey-only email was our most effective tool and resulted in 179 survey responses that same day, as well as 41 responses the next day. In addition, we believe that there may be some survey fatigue on the part of our constituents that receive communications from the city, as there have been 2 other major surveys recently regarding Lake Forest Mall and the election process. We had 94 impressions through Facebook, including 56 from ads and 38 from posts, 24 from Twitter, and 233 from Constant Contact, including 129 from a survey-only email to the weekly newsletter mailing list, 82 from the weekly newsletter, 18 from the Gaithersburg Youth Center mailing list, and 4 from the Benjamin Gaither Center email list. To remedy this next year, we can plan to highlight the survey more prominently in our weekly and other city newsletters and send additional email blasts throughout the survey period. We are hoping to have additional efforts to engage constituents next year, but we'll need some time to determine the best methods for this. Next slide, please. On question 1, we classified the responses into major categories and major items. There were 131 responses with 230 categorized requests, and there were some noticeable changes in budget priorities mentioned this year. Survey participants' responses focused more on city services than infrastructure, and the infrastructure requests were more directed at parks and open space than roadways and transit as in previous years. Parks and Recreation ranked number 1 this year with 23.5% of categorizations, where it was second with 15.4% last year. Economic Development ranked number 2 this year with 13.9% of categorizations, where it was 4th last year with 9.9%. Transportation ranked 3rd this year with 11.7% of categorizations compared to 1st place last year with 22.6%, which may be attributable to the increase in people working from home and lower levels of traffic. As far as major items go, affordable housing was for the 2nd year in a row the number 1 priority mentioned in responses, with 6.7% of the individual responses providing at least some mention of affordable housing. Parks and green space was mentioned by 6.5% of responses this year, as opposed to last year when it garnered 4th place with 4.2%. Next slide, please. On question 2, so the question was, if you were the person deciding where to allocate tax dollars, what would be your top 3 areas of focus in each of the following departments? We provided 5 service areas: police, public works, community services, neighborhood services, and parks, recreation, and culture, with multiple items for respondents to choose from. For police, the only noticeable change was that community outreach selection increased over last year, pushing it into 2nd place ahead of criminal investigations. The police cadet training program was priority for about 58% of individuals, so it was 4th. The mayor and city council's top priorities from the previous meeting align quite closely with survey respondents, as community policing and community outreach were selected unanimously, with criminal investigations and the police cadet program being selected by 50% of the mayor and city council each. For public works, recycling collection took the lead as the most important issue for survey responses, versus last year where park maintenance was the most important. In comparison to the mayor and city council, recycling was tied for 3rd place with flower planting and mowing, while snow plowing and park maintenance were the most important priorities. Next slide, please. Moving to community services, the priorities are almost identical between this year's and last year's survey respondents. However, council priorities varied greatly from the survey respondents, with housing assistance and social service and educational grants receiving unanimous support, and homeless services coming in 3rd. Grants ranked 6th in selection among survey participants. For neighborhood services, the top priorities remained unchanged, but garnered fewer responses than last year, as the percentage of respondents prioritizing landlord-tenant affairs jumped by 12%, though it still ranks lower than rental housing inspections and the programs listed on the slide. By comparison, landlord-tenant affairs was the most selected priority for the mayor and city council, while the sanitation issues received the 2nd most support, and property and neighborhood inspections received the most support. With regard to parks, recreation, and culture, parks and amenities remained the top priority, while recreation facilities and amenities dropped to 4th place, just behind youth and teen centers and after-school programs. The top 4 programs selected by the mayor and council aligned with those of the survey participants, except for 4th place for respondents being recreation facilities and amenities, while for the mayor and city council, it was active older adult programs. Next slide, please. And sorry about the bars on this. I think when they increased the font size, anyway, the last service area we asked about was services related to the COVID-19 pandemic, following the same format of pick your top 3 priorities as the survey area questions. Service area questions. The full question provided details on the financial situation we encountered during the 2021 fiscal year and asked respondents to prioritize 6 programs, including the top priority, the CARES Hub at Seneca Creek Community Church, which provides food assistance in the community. The 2nd priority was housing assistance, including rental, mortgage, and utility assistance and housing counseling, with the 3rd priority being small business assistance. Next slide, please. Moving on to potential revenue sources, this question changed slightly from last year with specific mention of the COVID-19 pandemic. Developer fee increases dropped to second place this year. That is the top bar, with public-private partnerships being the preferred method for additional revenue at this moment. So the developer fee increases is 24.8%, and the public-private partnerships is at 27.2%. My apologies on the slide. Spending reductions, tax increases, and issuance of bonds all saw slight increases in support from this year's survey respondents. Next slide, please. Before I discuss the areas that most survey respondents said they could do without, I'd like to mention that as part of the methodology, this was an open-ended question, but I only used the first item in a respondent's comments for the purpose of these calculations. If they provided more than one in their comment, the rest were left out. For reductions in service, the first priority for most respondents were parks, recreation, and culture items, followed by infrastructure and services, and then public safety. I should also mention that there is a slight error on this slide in that the other items should show at 9.1%, the same as the responses about cutting administrative expenses. In comparison to last year, Parks, Recreation, and Culture received about 8% more of the responses, while infrastructure and services received about 3% more. The categories of other and community services both saw decreases, 5% and 3% respectively. Without diving too deeply into the individual answers, parks and green spaces were more important, while structured spending for parks around events, festivals, and programming all saw declines in support. This would appear to be the result of the pandemic, where gathering in groups right now is unsafe. However, there has been an increase in support for spaces where people can safely congregate outdoors. The direction that our Parks, Recreation, and Culture Department has taken over the course of the pandemic is fairly consistent with these responses. Next slide, please. The last question in the survey before moving to demographics and communication preferences was asking if there was anything else that the respondents wanted the city to know. There were an array of responses, which I broke into 16 categories with a maximum of 3 per response. The slide in this presentation is displaying the information from the FY21 survey, but for reference, there were fewer comments on city services this year and more about the general direction of the city and administrative and governance issues. I counted 155 categorizations from 102 responses, with 24% of the responses providing commentary on administration and governance, 19% of responses including general observations, which were typically positive comments about the city, and tied at 11% were comments about infrastructure and services and public safety. Next slide, please. This year, we also requested demographic information from survey respondents, including gender, race, age, and general geographic location using the city's recycling map areas. In line with best practices, we offered respondents 6 options for gender, including male, female, transgender, non-binary, other, and prefer not to answer. 52% of survey respondents identified as female, 34% identified as male, and 2.3% identified as transgender, non-binary, or gender non-conforming. About 10.2% did not provide any gender identification or skip the question altogether. For racial breakdown, we use the categories that have been made available on other city forms, including the registration for parks, recreation, and culture programs. 64% of respondents identified as white, 16% either preferred not to answer or skip the question, 8% of respondents identified as Hispanic, Latino, or other Spanish origin of any race, around 5% identified as Black or African American, 5% as 2 or more races, and 4% as Asian. When comparing the racial demographics of the city to the racial demographics of the survey respondents, it does not appear to be a representative sample. I should note also that the survey was only available to respondents in English. Next slide, please. With respect to age, we broke the sample out into 10-year bands. We saw a more even split with respect to age than gender or race, with only 26% of respondents in the 65 and over category, with the age groups between 35 and 64 fairly evenly split, while a much smaller share participated from the 18 to 24 and 25 to 34 groups. As far as geographic breakout goes, responses from all the recycling areas registered between 12 and 20% of respondents. 4% of respondents live outside the city limits, and 21% prefer not to answer or skip the question. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just wanted to mention communication preferences. For the newsletter and website, the responses were almost identical in proportion to last year. Facebook was chosen slightly more by respondents this year. Nextdoor is provided as an option this year and garnered 28% of respondents' support. And written mail was chosen by about 10% less of participants this time. Thank you all for your time this evening, and I'd like to open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Nate. I did notice that at the beginning of the presentation, the program that, I'm just pulling it up on my screen here, that people said Gaithersburg needs more of, the category was Parks and Recreation. And then later in the survey, the category that if there's not enough money to pay for it, the first thing they want cut is Parks and Recreation. So, you know, we've got to toe a line here, evidently. I want to give the council members a chance to ask questions or comments. We'll go to Neil first.
All right, so a quick observation on what you just said, Mr. Mayor. It's possible that they want more parks and less recreation or something. If we don't subdivide the category, it's a little hard to get to really focus in on what they're looking for. But really what I wanted to suggest is, first of all, it's disappointing that the response rate is so much lower than it was in previous years. It makes it really hard to get a fair sampling of what's on people's minds. My suggestion is that, and part of that decrease might be my fault, frankly, because in past years, I know in last year for sure, and I think the year before, I actually posted it on my city council Facebook page and spent $5 or $10 to promote it. It's a surprising how far your money goes on Facebook, but an ad for $5 can reach thousands of people in the city limits of Gaithersburg between the ages of 18 and whatever. So I might suggest that not only do we post it on social media, but where there's an opportunity to get some additional paid impressions, that the cost benefit appears to be great, and that be considered going forward. Like I said, for $5 or $10, I think I probably got you 100 clicks on the page. So I might have personally driven up that response rate. So that's really my suggestion at this point. The data is very interesting and I'll spend some time digesting it.
Okay, we'll go to Ryan and then Mike.
Just for clarification, Nathan, I thought you said towards the beginning of the presentation that there was some Facebook advertising. So I just want to clarify that for the record here.
Yes, so the city did pay for advertising, I think, on Facebook. It may have also been on Twitter. I would need to get back to you, talk to Britta and the PIO about that. I know for certain that we paid for advertising on Facebook.
Right.
And so that actually provided most of the impressions from the Facebook.
Got it. I mean, we can always do more for sure. And Neil's suggestion, I mean, I don't want to downplay that. I think it's, we given the numbers of respondents, we can always do more. But I just wanted to clarify there was some advertising on social media. The other thing I wanted to respond to was the mayor's observation, which I think a number of us noticed as well. We don't want to oversimplify the results, but again, Nathan, you mentioned that as opposed to being some sort of reflection of cognitive dissonance by our residents, it might rather be a reflection of a more nuanced answer because Parks and Rec and culture encompasses a lot of different things. And I think you said in your presentation at one point, well, what this might be a reflection of is that people, when they're looking for potential places to cut for savings, they might be looking at programmed events, which also falls under Parks, Rec, and Culture, but for increased investments in parks and open spaces and the sort of the physical assets that are also managed by Parks, Rec, and Culture. So I think the mayor's right. We need to toe the line, but we also need to kind of, understand the nuances that we can glean from the data. And then just a more general point. First of all, Nathan, it was a great presentation. Thank you for putting it all together and for making certain observations about how we might be able to do a better job reaching out to the community to get more responses in future years. I think this is a very useful tool for guiding, our process, our strategies, our staff. But I think we ought to be clear that it's not scientific in the strictest sense. And that part of the problem, as reflected, I think, by the disproportionate share of certain demographics represented in this year's survey, and probably, let's be honest, in previous surveys, is that we need to think about other ways of reaching out to populations within our city that may not necessarily be on Facebook or may not necessarily be signed up to our e-newsletter, so that we're not sort of caught in an echo chamber of, these are, the particular demographic of engaged people who will be quick to respond to what we put out. That's a balancing act too, because we have limited marketing budgets and outreach budgets, and we already do a scientific survey through the American Community Survey every couple of years, I believe. But at the same time, I think, as our city government has been talking more about issues of equity and outreach to underrepresented communities, we need to think of other ways that we're trying to get this feedback, because asking this one particular segment who's already responding to the survey, how would you like to be communicated with, and having them say, website, email, nextdoor.com, whatever, is a little bit circular. And I think that's nobody's fault. I think that's just sort of built into the reality that this is not a complicated scientific survey. It's more of a local outreach effort. So I think we ought to think about that going forward. That's not for resolving this fiscal year, but as we plan ahead. In the meantime, I still think the data that we've collected is very useful, but we have to sort of understand it for what it is, as a useful tool for our budgeting process, but not necessarily a truly scientific sample.
All right, we'll go to Mike.
Yeah, thanks. Let me echo the compliments that Ryan made as well. But also I just want to continue to follow up on Ryan's point about what we're actually looking at and the demographic responses that we see, the demographics of the response we see. And I was struck by the admission that we only issued this survey in English, and so that might be our first mistake. We've obviously over sampled the white majority, I guess, in terms of respondents. It's certainly not representative of the most diverse city in the United States by far. And so I think we have to be cautious in interpreting what we see here. So definitely we have to think about other ways we could improve our outreach and responses, especially from all segments of the community. And I think that's one of the problems when you do something online, is that we already know that there's a significant disparity in broadband access, in use of the internet and social media. And I think so that being said, we have to be cautious about what the data is telling us. Everybody should have an opportunity to tell us what they think about our budget priorities and how we should be looking at them. But if we're only hearing from an oversampled segment of the population, then I think we have to be a little bit more cautious about that. So I guess the only other disagreement I have, the only other issue that I would disagree with Ryan about, is that I'm not entirely convinced that our other survey is necessarily very scientific either. So I think it suffers from the same problems that we see here. These are just, some of those issues and disparities are magnified in this particular sample. Nonetheless, I think there is, as everybody has said so far, I think we have some useful information, but also some confusion and perhaps in the way that the questions are asked. And the problem with doing surveys is if you keep, if you parse each question into different components, then you get to survey burden and that don't complete the survey or just aren't willing to respond. So I think we're gonna have to look at some additional strategies. Nonetheless, there's a lot of, there is useful information here. I think we just have to put it in perspective about what it really means and who we're really hearing from. So, those are my comments, but thank you for all the work and the analysis.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Lorianne.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Nathan, for the presentation as well. I did have questions about the city services that respondents asked for reduction if money was an issue. Did we go into specifics or about which services within each department, or were they provided the opportunity to?
So that was an open-ended question. So they could provide whatever answer that they would like to. And then I went through and categorized all of those by department and kind of service area. I do have some more limited, so I've kind of grouped them by the specific request and then the department. But those are still categorized in a way. There are some where it's very similar and others where it's, a one-off item that people have provided. So it just depends on those responses.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we could get access to those items as we're going through the budget process, if there's areas that we should look closer at as we are looking at finalizing the budget, that may be helpful in seeing where maybe some services are no longer needed, or we've created a virtual opportunity for services to proceed. So it would be interesting to see what those, if there are any commonalities that were found in the responses.
Yeah, I could talk to Tanisha about providing those responses. I don't know if she has any.
Well, there's a report, Nathan, that goes out to the mayor and council, right?
So we have the full survey responses that we've provided in past years. We haven't provided the categorizations that I've done in the past years, but I think we could potentially provide those as well.
We'll take a look at it. We'll take a look at it.
Okay. Thank you. That was all. And if I can just echo what my colleague said, the more ways that we can reach all segments of our population would be helpful. I know that we were really diligent in getting the census information out to hard to reach populations. And if we could duplicate some of those efforts when we're, putting out a survey of this magnitude to solicit these sorts of responses, it may be helpful to kind of mirror those approaches. So I don't know if the magazine was also used, our quarterly magazine, postcards. I don't know if those were included. And I think the biggest driver is ensuring that, the different languages that are spoken in the community are also, we have opportunities to translate that survey. All right, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Rob.
Thanks, Mayor. And I just want to chime in to echo my colleagues' kind words about the presentation. It's a really great way to present the data that we got. It is anecdotal, but receiving 200 something opinions on various aspects of the city is probably 200 something more than come and testify at city council meetings. So it is important. These are individual residential expressions. So I would like to see the data because it would drive individual ideas on things. And so it's good for that. I think also, if we are going to move in the direction of a more holistic way of collecting data that is significant, I'm not sure scientifically significant, but significant to drive our programming, we would probably have to put money into it, money, time, different ideas. So I'd love over time to get thoughts from staff on the devotion of resources to certain initiatives to try to figure out what our populace is thinking. So thanks.
Thank you, Rob. We'll go back to Neil.
All right, thanks. I'd like to comment on what everybody's been saying, and it's actually been on my mind for a long time, and it's come up here before, which is if you look at the demographics of the people that responded to the survey, and you look at the chart that was presented a couple of weeks ago when the folks were showing us the data about COVID, they showed us a demographic slide that I thought was very interesting, which was they showed us the slices of age and the demographic makeup of each group in terms of racial identity. And the older the group was, the more it was dominated by white people and the less it was dominated by minorities. But once you got under 65 years old, you started to see that the future population of Gaithersburg, or at least the younger population of Gaithersburg, looks very different than the older population. And it just comes back to the point that there are large segments of the population that we're not hearing from. We're hearing on frequently from older white people and less frequently from younger people of color. And yet that's what, that represents the next, 40, 50 years of Gaithersburg. So one of the topics I'm on, just as a quick aside, I'm on the committee, the programming committee for the conference at the Maryland Municipal League Conference this summer. And I brought up the suggestion, which was embraced and extended by the committee, to form a panel discussion on how to reach harder to reach communities. So I think what we've seen is nobody really has a good answer for this, but I think it's something that's really important, and that it would be great if staff would look for some best practices and see if there's any way we can do a better job of reaching the hard to reach here. I think it's important that we find out what needs of the underrepresented population is in our city, and make sure that we're sensitive to those.
Thank you, Neil. I think Tanisha wanted to chime in real quick here. Go ahead, Tanisha.
I appreciate all the feedback tonight. I just want to mention a couple of things. One, that the budget survey tool, as some of you have remarked, is one of many tools that we use to make sure that we're trying to engage the community. We recognize its limitations, and I think are looking for general themes of consistency, and it's certainly not informing our exact decision-making process, but the themes are helpful to be sure we're on the right track. And on the right track for whom is a good question. I have talked with the staff, and we have two surveys that we do, as I'm sure you guys are aware. There's the every other year citizen survey, resident survey that you all conduct. And then we do this annual budget survey, which is a smaller sort of snapshot. It's done in-house by staff. And Nate and Janice, spend all the time coding answers and working hard to pull it all together. I have some experience with sort of a combined effort that would combine both of those surveys and give us some more statistically significant and demographically significant and substantial results that we can use and feel a little more confident about relying on. And we'll be shifting to that model later this year. So instead of the survey we've done every year or every other year, in the fall, we'll be doing a different version of that sort of combines these two approaches. It also uses focus groups. It's done outside of the city so that there's more anonymity, and there's multiple languages that we can access, and lots of other ways that company can use to really tap in to those who we may not get a chance to talk to, from telephone users. They have access to cell phone data, and they can really get the numbers, and in fact won't bring the survey back until they meet the statistically significant samples that we've determined, be it on a citywide basis or even within geography and demographic groups. So I'm looking forward to bringing that forward. The staff knows about it, but we haven't started working on that yet because we're still working on this one. We mentioned it briefly during strategic directions last month, but I think we didn't spend a whole lot of time on it. So just wanted to mention that all of those points are well taken. certainly on the radar and things that we're trying to actively incorporate as we move forward with our next major survey.
Thank you, Tanisha, and thank you, Nathan and Janice, for your work, and we appreciate it. We're going to move on in the meeting now to our next agenda item, which is public comments. This is the time when the mayor and council like to hear from anybody who'd like to speak on a topic that's not a public hearing topic, and tonight we don't have public hearings, so basically anything we ask, you keep your remarks no more than 3 minutes. If you have more than 3 minutes worth of things to say, then you can submit them. You can testify for 3 minutes and then submit the rest, or submit the entire thing in writing, and we'll consider it just like oral testimony. Tech team, do you want to play the instructional video for anybody who'd like to speak? This is how you can get to speak.
Good evening. If you've connected to the meeting tonight via Zoom and you're on a desktop or a laptop and you wish to make a public comment, we can't currently see or hear you. What you need to do, please, is wiggle your mouse around and look towards the bottom center of your screen. You should see a raise hand button. Go ahead and click on that now for us, please. Alternatively, if you've connected in via telephone, you can press *9.
Thank you, tech team. So we do have a few comments here. We're going to start with Mary Jo LaFrance. Tech team, if you can bring up Mary Jo. Mary Jo, when you come up, just unmute yourself, state your name and address, or if you prefer, your neighborhood, and go right ahead. Looks like we're transitioning here. Okay. Tech team, we're bringing up Mary Jo LaFrance. Mary Jo, go right ahead.
Hello and good evening. Mary Jo LaFrance, 105 Chestnut Street. I serve on 2 boards for the city of Gaithersburg, the Historic District Commission and the Animal Control Board. I am here this evening not as a board member, but as a citizen of Gaithersburg and a resident of the Chestnut Mean Historic District. I am here to ask you to approve the petition prepared by the HDC. You will find in the record considerable findings of evidence, reference materials to support the possible historic designation of 414 East Diamond Avenue. And approval would give everyone the opportunity to view our city's story in a new and exciting way. The everyday people who settled here were not so different from ourselves. Yet they were risk takers, pioneers, entrepreneurs who took their money and their families and risked everything for something new and challenging. They chose a new life and settled Gaithersburg and made it their home. They raised their children here, and their grandchildren stayed and did the same. They built grand homes, sustainable grand homes. I ask you to consider the petition before you, approve it. It would allow the public the opportunity to comment and contribute to the record. If you decide to approve the petition, which includes statistics about environmental impact that demolition causes and the long-term effects of on our dear planet and our community, we must remain a green city and proceed responsibly. I ask that you, the mayor and council, support Old Town by stimulating responsible growth and improvements. I ask that the mayor and council to protect and save important and possibly historic structures in our wonderful city so that we may continue to have living examples of our story to share with future generations. who will also decide to make our incredible city their home. Please let us add our story, add to it, and get excited and support our town with responsible growth. I would request that you, the mayor and council, protect our city's history from possibly disappearing.
Thank you. You're out of time. Just if you have more, just please feel free to submit it to us in writing. We appreciate it.
I would love to do that, but unfortunately, if I submit it in writing, won't the decision be over?
Well, we are going to discuss tonight whether to introduce. So I think we understand the position. You've stated it pretty well. So we're going to thank you. We're going to move on to the next caller, please. And that is Stuart Barr. Tech team, if you can bring up Stuart. And Stuart, just unmute yourself, state your name and address or neighborhood if you prefer, and go right ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the time. Stuart Barr with the law firm Lurch, Early & Brewer, 7600 Wisconsin Avenue, Bethesda. We represent Identity and its property at 414 East Diamond Avenue. 4 months ago, Identity applied for a demolition permit. The Historic District Commission withheld the permit and has petitioned the property for historic designation, which is item 11C on your agenda. We submitted a letter in opposition. Commencement of the historic designation process is not in the best interests of the city for the following reasons. To begin with, we agree with the city planning staff that the property doesn't meet the criteria for designation. The staff performed careful and thorough research, and we don't need further time, delay, expense, or process to analyze that conclusion. If the city commences the potential designation process, then Identity's experts will explain in detail why the property doesn't meet the criteria, but we don't think that's a prudent use of the city's resources or Identity's. Identity would prefer to devote all available resources to fulfilling its mission of serving youths in the community. Second, the city can consider designating historic any city property at any time. But when a property owner has invested time and money weighing its options and applied for a demolition permit, there really needs to be an eye-popping reason or some kind of serious oversight to withhold that permit and commence designation. There is no such reason here. The demolition permit is not the opportunity to commence a designation process that could have been commenced at any time in the past many years. Third, we don't think it makes sense for the city to prolong a vacant, condemned structure. And even if the structure could be repaired, it doesn't meet Identity's future needs. A vote against the petition this evening is not a vote against historic preservation. It is not in any way precedential. It is not any indication that historic preservation is not important to us as a city. It is simply a recognition of a confluence of circumstances, an unfortunate fire of an aging structure, a condemnation of the building, a determination by a nonprofit organization that it does not make financial sense and is not consistent with its future needs to try to repair the building, a demolition permit application, a property that is not on the list of potential historic resources in the city master plan, a property that the Maryland Historical Trust determined was ineligible for listing in the National Register of Historical Places, and a property that the planning staff determined did not meet the designation criteria. Issuing the demolition permit now is in the best interest of the city. The city will be better served by supporting this particular organization in its time of need and helping it literally rise from the ashes so that it may continue to support the Gaithersburg community. The story of Gaithersburg will continue to be told without this particular structure, and hopefully that story will involve Identity as a major contributor. Please vote no on tonight's petition and take all steps to issue the demolition permit as quickly as possible so Identity can move forward with its plans and continue its good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Tech team, if you could bring up our next caller, John Rumble. And John, when you unmute yourself, just state your name and address or neighborhood and go right ahead.
Good evening. My name's John Rumble. I live at 11 Montgomery Avenue in Old Town Gaithersburg. I also like to state for the record that I previously was chair of the Identity Board of Directors, but I'm not in that position anymore. Anyway, I would send a letter to the mayor and to all the council members as well as the planning commission stating my opposition to the petition and encourage the mayor and the city council tonight to reject it and allow Identity to go ahead and proceed with the demolition of 414 East Diamond Avenue. Mr. Barr aptly summarized most of the technical points that I think are really relevant, but let me just add a couple other things that I think have been overlooked in the HTC presentation to the council. That area of East Diamond Avenue consists of both structures between, I guess it's Teacher's Way, where Gaithersburg, the road that runs along Gaithersburg Elementary School and Gaithersburg Junior High School to the railroad track. And anybody who approaches that from either the Summit Avenue or Girard Avenue directions would recognize that the character of that has changed many times over the year. By the railroad tracks, there are many low semi-industrial buildings that clearly don't deserve any kind of historic mention at this stage. On the side the 414 is on, there are many buildings that may be historic in one way or another, but the city has allowed, for example, erection of very large commercial signs that block, in most cases, any view of those structures. And I think that it's an incredible stretch of the imagination to say that that area is now historic in nature and needs to be preserved. What really needs to be preserved is Identity's ability to serve the Latino community in Gaithersburg. Identity has done that for many years, very, very successfully, both in partnership with the city of Gaithersburg, as well as partnership of Montgomery County and the state and many other foundations. They have carefully examined their need to have a better serving community building that will continue their service to this community. And I urge you to reject the petition and allow Identity to move forward with the future.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We'll move on to our next caller, Diego Uriburu from Identity. Welcome, Diego. Just unmute yourself, state your name, address, or neighborhood, and go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and honorable members of the City Council. My name is Diego Uriburu, proud founder and executive director of Identity. Identity has called the city of Gaithersburg its home for the past 20 years. In pursuit of a more equitable and inclusive society, Identity creates opportunities for Latino and other historically underserved youth and their families to realize their highest potential and thrive. By the end of this fiscal year, in addition to providing educational, social, emotional, and workforce and employment services to youth and families, Identity expects to have provided critical case management COVID-related services to 10,000 city and county residents. In addition, by the end of the fiscal year, we expect to have provided more than $3 million in emergency financial assistance to these families. The city of Gaithersburg is one of our most important partners. A little over a year ago, there was a fire at our headquarters. As a result, the building was condemned. In November, we applied for a demolition permit. As part of that process, we understood the HTC had to decide if the building was or was not historic. City staff have twice stated our building did not meet the criteria to be designated as historic. We have spent thousands of dollars we do not have, and this process has also forced us to take focus away from our core mission, which at this point in time means helping the communities most impacted by COVID. We urge you to please deny the petition. Continuing with this process will not only harm Identity, but also the city's most vulnerable communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tech team, if you could bring up Shanika Whitehurst, please. Shanika, unmute yourself, state your name and address or neighborhood, and go right ahead.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Mayor and also council. I just wanted to take time again this evening. It was promising to hear the the updates that were provided from the legislature in regards to the Police Accountability Acts and the other police reforms that have been put into place. That did, however, lead me back to wondering if there's progress that's been made on Mr. O'Cron's case as far as the report is concerned from his issuance. I know upon my last ask of that, as far as the council or the city was concerned, I still believe that outside of receiving the report, the city could still lead discussions with its residents, and it's still a concern. And it will, at least for the most part, remain my concern until the report's issued, until there's actual conversations that are held around this. That part doesn't change. And, you know, being the mother of a young toddler, a Black, that will grow up to be a young Black boy living in the city of Gaithersburg, it makes me highly concerned. So I just wanted to restate and reiterate those facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanika. Tech team, if we could bring up Monica Marquina, please. Monica, good to hear from you. Please state your name and address or neighborhood. Go right ahead.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Monica Marquina, and I'm a resident of the Pheasant Run community. I'm here to express my strong opposition of the petition by the HTC to designate 414 East Diamond Avenue historic. As a 30-plus year resident and a member of Identity's Board of Directors, I strongly support city staff's position that the building does not meet the threshold for historic designation. Despite advice by planning staff, the HTC has chosen to pursue designation to the detriment of a nonprofit that has given so much to this community. They have dismissed the legal issues raised, as well as the information staff has gathered, which disputes the HTC's rationale point by point. A new building would allow Identity to incorporate energy efficient features, bring up everything to present code standards, as well as play a role in the revitalization of this central business district. This would potentially stimulate additional investments in neighborhood properties in this part of the city. Any investment would be very much appreciated by all of us who care deeply about the future of Old Town. While the HTC has ignored city planning and legal staff on this matter, and instead chosen to receive pro bono support from a city resident to make their case, Identity has had to retain an attorney and an expert on historic designation at a potential cost of tens of thousands of dollars if this process moves forward. During this period of unprecedented need, is this really the time to add unnecessary costs to a community nonprofit? All of our time and efforts must remain laser focused, helping the neediest in our community and prepare them for the lasting impacts of the pandemic. I am sure that the Mayor and City Council would strongly agree. I respectfully request that you vote against this petition. Thank you so much for the opportunity to provide comments.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers from the public this evening? Going once, going twice? Okay. Well, we thank everyone for their testimony. We will be discussing the petition from the HTC later in this meeting. To Shanika's comment, as soon as we're able to, we will release the results of the investigation when it's completed. It's on our minds just as it is yours. And for now, we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is from the Mayor and Council. We're going to start with Councilmember Mike Sesma.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to all the people who spoke to us tonight. We're running late, so I want to be as brief as I can. I just want to wish every family, every child, every parent, every teacher and staff member at MCPS. I hope that their first day of in-person school from K through 12 went well. I know there was a lot of excitement to get back in the classroom, but there's also some anxiety. I think we all understand that. So I hope that this is the beginning of a great year, but I think everybody needs to maintain care and take care of themselves, protect yourself, your family, and your friends and neighbors as well. So on Friday, I attended an event at Brown Station Elementary School, which a local faith community, the Iglesia Ni Cristo, or the Church of Christ on Cedar Avenue, had organized a donation of bags of PPE and food and snacks for Brown Station families. A very generous donation. I met with them, with their representatives of the congregation, as well as the Church of Christ organization that was represented there, and with the principal. Council member Wu showed up to help with accepting that donation, but just another example of the generosity of people who live in Gaithersburg and in the community. It's what makes us a great city. Last week, a number of us on the council and from the city manager's office attended the virtual National League of Cities Congressional City Conference. It was actually a really terrific meeting, and a good deal of the time and sessions that we attended was hearing from members of the new administration. We heard specifically from Vice President Harris, from Secretaries Yellen and Buttigieg, Climate Advisor Gina McCarthy. We also heard from Speaker of the House Pelosi and many members of Congress who also attended. What we learned about, we learned a lot of the details about the America Rescue Plan Act that was enacted on Thursday and signed by the president. So there's a lot of good things there, but I think what the most important thing that we learned at the Congressional City Conference is that this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, looks to local government as partners in the recovery of from the pandemic. So we're going to hear a lot more of that. There's a lot of information there to be unpacked, but I think we know already that there's a strong commitment to climate action, to economic recovery, to children and communities, housing, et cetera. So we'll be explaining that, and I think certainly we'll be benefiting from that, and hopefully our direct funding, rescue funding will be straightened out so that we'll be able to address those issues. And then finally, the last reminder, not just a reminder, but basically a personal experience I can relate. Last week, my wife and I finally were able to register and receive our vaccine, our COVID vaccines. I encourage every member of the public to do the same. I know it's a frustrating system. The state has just rolled out a new vaccination registration site today. I haven't seen it. I don't need to see it now because our next appointment for the second vaccination is already scheduled. But I believe it's safe. I think the science backs it up, and I think it protects me and my family, my loved ones, my neighbors, and those around me from potential infection. And it certainly is something that I am happy to have received. Now that I've received it, at least the first vaccination, I think it's important to remember that we're not through this pandemic yet. The scientists led by Dr. Fauci are warning us that we still need to be careful. So wear a mask, wash your hands frequently, avoid crowds, especially indoors, keep your distance, your social distance from people, and do all those things that have kept you safe up to this point, kept you and your family and your neighbors safe up to this point. We're going to get through this, but it's going to take, we can't stop now. We're almost to the finish line. We don't want to trip before we get there. So that's it for tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. We'll go to Lorianne.
Thank you, Mayor. So just a few updates. Mike mentioned that we went to the National League of Cities Congressional Cities Conference last week. We had 3 days of hearing more about the federal advocacy priorities from our municipal leaders, and convened on Wednesday to speak with our federal elected officials to advocate for priorities. And we had about 6 virtual meetings with our federal partners, advocating for a variety of priorities, including transportation and infrastructure resources. As Mike mentioned, we had a really good show of support from the president's administration. We heard from the Vice President Kamala Harris, who talked about some funding that would become available for health literacy. And so it'll be exciting to see if we can use that funding to address the systemic health disparities in the city by championing some health literacy initiatives. And so hope to learn more about that. I also had the honor of testifying before the Department of Transportation Secretary, former Mayor Pete Buttigieg. He heard from quite a few of the members of the National League of Cities Transportation Infrastructure and Services Committee. And so I was there to advocate for some of our projects, some of the priority projects from our pedestrian, our Safe Routes to Schools Safety Act to ensure safe walks to school and safety, creating safer streets for pedestrians and drivers. Asks about federal funding for signal changes and improvements. And following the testimony, we also included, I believe we heard about the MARC funding that would be really critical to the community, especially our region, as we look forward to the recovery efforts. I also moderated a panel discussion to focus on standing up equity in small businesses and startup as we move towards the recovery. As we know, the Paycheck Protection Program that was released in December, Congress approved an additional $284 billion in small business relief funds. However, most business owners without banking relationships or the appropriate resources, access to the appropriate resources or support to complete those applications were left out. And so while we created our own similar program in the city to provide small micro grants to residents, this is an opportunity to shed light on other ways that we can really support this sector of the business community. And so most of the issues were impacting small businesses of color. And so looking at best practices that we can bring back to the city to ensure overall economic recovery for businesses in our city. As we know, there's been a lot of issues with unemployment associated with the pandemic, and with unemployment issues, housing insecurity, food insecurity, a lot of insecurity issues have arisen during this time. And so I was happy to partner with some of our local nonprofits, including the Brothers Academy, Cool and Dope, the 480 Club, and Cross Community Church to distribute some much needed food items and supplies to our residents. And it is Women's History Month, and a lot of women who were in the workforce were disconnected since the pandemic. And so a lot of the burden is falling on women in the household. And so making sure that they have the few resources and connecting them to other opportunities. I also joined Mayor Ashman at a food distribution event as well at Cider Mill last week. And so the needs are continuing, and the lines aren't getting any shorter. And so we're going to have to all work together to ensure that we take care of each other during this difficult time. And just really happy to see us coming together as a community. And last but not least, I hosted another event yesterday for Women's History Month, and was happy to have Councilmember Navarro, Mayor Kate Stewart, and some of our young residents from Quince Orchard High School, the Freedom Writers Club, and really had a wonderful discussion just about women in leadership and how we can use our platforms during this time of challenges and overcoming the digital divide, the long-lasting effects of the pandemic, and working together to rebuild our community to ensure that our businesses are revised and revitalized, and we get that economic development back up and running. And so that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorianne. We'll go to Councilmember Wu.
Thanks, Mayor. I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rob. We'll go to Neil.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll keep it fairly brief too. Like Mike, I've been vaccinated. I've actually had both shots, as I mentioned last meeting. I'm more than 2 weeks past shot number 2 without any significant ill effects, just a sore arm for a little bit. And because of that, the CDC guidelines said I can actually visit my grandchildren. First time I've seen them in over a year. They have grown since I saw them last, but it was really nice to be able to see them in person and not just by a FaceTime. I have to say, I've never made it from Gaithersburg to Raleigh, North Carolina in 4 hours before without being on an airplane. So that was pretty special too. There is a Transportation Planning Board meeting this week, and one of the things we're wrestling with, and that was meant to be a smooth segue from the 4-hour trip, is that traffic has been reduced so dramatically that everyone's trying to prognosticate on what transportation will be like after COVID ends. So I'm looking forward to the discussion and seeing, where nobody knows at this point if as many people will be commuting to work, for example, and whether they'll be going back to public transit, which has been seen volumes reduced dramatically compared to other modes of transportation. It's a very interesting problem, and a lot of people have their own ideas, and we'll have to wait and see what comes out. But it makes it very interesting to try to make plans for the future when the future may look very different than it is today. So if something interesting comes out of that meeting, I will report back, and I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks. Just like Mike said, stay safe out there.
Thank you, Neil. We'll go to Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple additional announcements. I just wanted to point out for the public, if you haven't heard already, that our local court system, as of today, is starting to reopen to the public. It's under what the courts call their phase 4 of their reopening plan. And I encourage you to look into the details, but basically this is the first time that our local circuit court and district court will start to be physically open again under COVID limits and restrictions, but physically open again for members of the public to enter, to file paperwork or ask questions of the court staff or clerks, or review records as needed. Again, subject to certain limitations just for safety. So for those of you who need to make use of those services, just wanted you to be aware that today was the first day when they've sort of officially opened back up to the public physically. Also today, the governor issued an order that any funds received as part of federal COVID assistance programs, which, as we understand from news reports, many people are going to start receiving either electronically or physically through checks in the mail in the coming weeks, cannot be garnished by creditors. And as we've already been talking a lot tonight and in previous days about the need to put certain protections around these assistance programs and ensure that people can actually make use of them in the dire economic circumstances that many of our residents find themselves in. I want people to know about the governor's order today, so they know that if you have money coming in from an assistance program under the new federal legislation, that your creditors, your landlord, others cannot come in and take that money away to say that they need it to pay back a judgment they have against you or a default they have against you. Important sort of consumer protection for people receiving that assistance from the federal government. And then finally, since this is our last official meeting before the big spring holidays, I just want to wish everyone who will be observing Easter or Passover or any other holidays a very happy one. But let me say that between quarantine fatigue and beautiful spring weather and the increase in vaccine distributions and missing some of our beloved traditions of this season, like our St. Patrick's Day parade, all of us can be vulnerable to the temptation to want to go out and emerge from our cocoons of seclusion from the past year. As Neil said, there's new CDC guidance indicating that vaccinated people and low-risk households can now start to get together indoors without masks. Schools are reopening and the county is loosening restrictions on businesses. However, whether you're itching to go out for a socially distanced St. Patrick's Day or to watch March Madness with friends or to your Passover Seders or Easter dinners or other events, please, please, please continue to adhere to the public health protocols and the guidelines and the rules to keep everyone safe. As Council Vice President Sesma said, and as Neil said as well, but it can't be said enough, please keep wearing your masks in public, avoiding large gatherings, washing your hands, practicing your social distancing, and getting vaccinated when it's your turn in order to protect all of us. And make sure to carefully review that latest guidance from our trusted health officials. And if you find yourself having had a few Guinnesses or a few too many cups of Manischewitz and you need a safe ride home, please arrange for a designated driver, or you can take advantage of our region's Sober Ride program, which provides free rides home up to a certain value. And you can learn more about that at soberride.com. So again, happy holidays and go Terps.
Thank you, Ryan. Go Terps indeed. I will just note that we have the next 2 weeks, we have work sessions. The first one on Monday, March 22nd is to receive an update on the stormwater program rate and have that discussion. Then the second one on Monday, March 29th is to have our 2021-22 Racial Equity Awareness and Action Plan discussion, which was deferred from our strategic planning session because that went way too long. So that one is coming up. And these sessions will be conducted on Zoom just as this one is, so you can observe and participate in the same ways as this one. And the next regular meeting of the Mayor and City Council is on Monday, April 5th. And we'll go to from the City Manager, Tanisha.
Thank you, Mayor. Everything's been well covered this evening, so I will not belabor any points. And I still love my job, so I will just say, go Big Ten.
That is really, really diplomatic, very diplomatic. Okay, we will move on to Economic Development Update. Tech team, if you could bring up Tom Lonergan, that would be great. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening. And given the hour and the agenda that remains ahead of us, I'll abbreviate my comments and just say that I wanted to mention that the Montgomery County Planning Department and the county's Department of Transportation are hosting a virtual community meeting tomorrow night, March 16th, from 7:30 to 8:30 to share updates for planning and transportation projects in the Great Seneca Science Corridor Master Plan area. The area includes neighborhoods and employment centers surrounding the Shady Grove Adventist Hospital, the Western Quince Orchard neighborhood, the universities at Shady Grove and Rosemont. Montgomery Planning's Mid-County Planning Division staff will present on two planning efforts currently underway in the area: the Great Seneca Science Corridor Minor Master Plan Amendment and a Corridor Forward Plan, suggested approach to evaluating transit options in the I-270 corridor, including the CCT or Corridor Cities Transit Way. Both presentations will be followed by a Q&A session, but RSVPs are required to participate in the meeting. You can do so by visiting the project's website at montgomeryplanning.org/events/Great Seneca Science Corridor Virtual Community Meeting. And aside from that, I'll save it for next time, Judd. Judd, Mr.
I
Mayor.
am muted. I am muted. I was bound to do that one of these days. I was saying I admire how fluidly Great Seneca Science Corridor rolls off your tongue, because I find it a tongue twister every single time. So we're going to move on to ordinances, resolutions, and regulations. And tech team, if you could bring up Janice Hartman, please, our acting director. I guess we still call Janice our acting director of finance administration. And we're going to talk about a contract amendment to extend our audit services. Janice, welcome back.
Hi, thank you. So this request is to allow the city manager to enter into a contract amendment to extend the financial statement audit services of Cohn-Resnick LLP for an additional year. In April 2016, the mayor and city council authorized the city manager to enter into a contract with Cohn-Resnick to provide financial statement audit services for fiscal years beginning July 1st, 2015 through June 30th, 2020. Although not required within the city charter, the city typically completes a competitive bid process every 5 years for the selection of the financial auditors. However, due to extenuating circumstances, we believe it is in the best interest of the city to waive the solicitation process and extend the contract for a 1-year term with an additional 1-year option period. Due to the staffing changes over the recent years and the current recruitment of a new director of finance and administration, retaining Cohn-Resnick to provide financial statement audit services for an additional year with the 1-year optional period thereafter will provide much needed consistency and reliability. Staff is requesting that the city manager be authorized to amend the contract with Cohn-Resnick LLP to extend the contract for the additional year and possible option years, and and request that the original contract amount of $215,595 be increased to $313,595. This is a total additional compensation in amount not to exceed $98,000, which represents $49,000 per year, which is in line with last year's fees. And so I'll take any questions you have at this time.
Thank you, Janice. Questions, comments? We'll go to Rob.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a quick question. Janice, you'd mentioned the possibility of options. Is that set in stone or?
No. So, I mean, really what we want is the additional year, and, talking with legal, they recommended having the additional optional period just to provide, I guess, flexibility should the need arise. But really what we're looking for is the additional 1 year at this time.
I mean, I think we're all satisfied with the services being provided, but our tradition is competition. So I'm fine with 1 year. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Neil.
I'd like to move the resolution.
Okay, Mike.
I'd second that. I want to make sure that Rob hasn't amended it, but I didn't hear an amendment. So I think I will second the resolution that was just moved.
Okay, well then I will call the roll. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. We'll start with Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Sesma.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember Sales.
Aye.
And Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
All right, carries unanimously. And Janice, you are staying for the next agenda item, which is the introduction of our budget ordinance, and I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you. So this is the introduction of the annual ordinance adopting the city budget for the fiscal year July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022, and levying an ad valorem tax on all accessible property within the city of Gaithersburg. After introduction of the ordinance, staff will prepare a public advertisement of the budget, which is scheduled to be posted in the Washington Post on April 1st, 2021. Staff will prepare a detailed budget workbook and provide it to the mayor and city council by April 5th, 2021. The detailed budget book will be posted online, and a hard copy will also be available to the public for review at City Hall. Currently, due to the pandemic, appointments will be required to review in person. I'd like to note that this is the initial draft, and we do expect additional changes to the proposed budget due to the changing economic environment and the recent American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Changes are anticipated between the introduction of this initial budget ordinance and the preparation of the detailed budget workbook. A public hearing will be held on April 19th, 2021, and any comments on the proposed budget are welcome. There will be a detailed presentation of the budget, and details of the changes between the initial ordinance and the proposed budget book will be presented. Budget work sessions are scheduled for April 26th and April 27th. The topic of the first night will be the operating budget, and the second night will cover the capital and the stormwater budgets. The record for public comment is scheduled to remain open until May 12th, 2021. It is anticipated that the budget will be brought forth to Mayor and City Council for consideration of final adoption on June 7th, 2021. I'd also like to mention at this time that since the city's real property tax rate of 0.2620 is slightly less than the constant yield tax rate of 0.2646, the constant yield tax rate statute does not require a notice or a hearing. And so at this time, I'd like to ask you to introduce the ordinance and notify the public that the hearing is scheduled to be held on Monday, April 19th, 2021.
Thank you, Janice. I saw Mike's hand go up first and then Neil. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I think we're going to have plenty of opportunity to talk about this, and we already know that this draft is going to be subject to perhaps significant changes. So I will just move the ordinance, the introduction of the ordinance.
Okay, Neil.
Well, I'll second the introduction, but I have a quick question on the ad valorem tax rate issue. Does your comment say that the constant yield tax rate would be higher mean that we're actually projecting less revenue than we would have if we raised the tax rate? I'm sorry, I meant.
Yeah, so
the same revenue will actually go down.
it slightly. So it's very close, and what we're expecting to receive from what was assessed as of July 2020 and what they're estimating that will be assessed July 2021. And so we're just under that threshold. So it does look at this point, their estimates, it does look like we'll be slightly down on our tax revenue, but it's very close. So there could be changes in the estimates, and that's based on a large amount of appeals that they're forecasting in their estimate. So that number could always change.
All right, I was just curious because that's the first time since I joined the council that I've heard that the revenue was actually projected to go down, but it's understandable. Thank you.
All right, go to Ryan.
Yeah, I just had a quick question as well. I know we're gonna have plenty of time to debate the details, but we talked earlier about this issue with the formula for municipal aid from the federal American Rescue Plan legislation. And I know we're all continuing to do our advocacy to try to figure out an answer. And at this point, we just have early estimates. But do we have any sense as to whether or not whatever aid we ultimately receive, I know that a certain amount of it is allowed to be applied to revenue shortfalls, as I understand it. Would that come into play for purposes of determining, what our ultimate revenue is for purposes of calculating whether we need to do the hearing?
This may be a Lynn question.
Yeah. All right. Well, it doesn't have to be answered tonight, but I just wanted to raise that issue.
Are you meaning the tax hearing? So that it would not affect that at all.
Okay. Because we're only looking at tax revenues, not at other sources of revenue for purposes of that hearing, right?
Correct.
Okay. Fine.
Okay. Well, we do have a motion and a second, so I'm gonna, unless anybody has anything else, I'm gonna call the roll. All those in favor say aye. This is to introduce the budget ordinance. Any opposed say nay. Start with Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Sesma.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember Sales.
Aye.
And Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Okay, carries unanimously. Consider it introduced. Thank you very much, Janice.
All right, thank you guys.
And tech team, thank you, Nathan. I didn't even realize you were there because I was so focused on this. Thank you both. And tech team, if you can bring up Chris Berger, and we're gonna now talk about the recommendation from the HDC. Chris, welcome, and go right ahead.
Good.
Frank,
evening.
welcome.
If the tech team can pull up page 142, please. So at its February 24th meeting, a majority of the Historic District Commission members approved a resolution to petition the mayor and council to designate as historic 414 East Diamond Avenue, also known as the Burn King House. The decision before you tonight is whether or not to accept the petition and begin the designation process. First, a brief description of the building. It's a 2.5-story folk Victorian style structure. It has a full width front porch supported by turn posts. It has sash windows, and it has cross gable hip and shed roofs. The wood frame walls are covered with asbestos shingles. The parking lot measures approximately 7,500 square feet. Additions have been added to the rear. Some of the original wood windows have been replaced, and some of the scroll work at the porch has been removed. No outbuildings exist. The building was most recently used as office space and meeting rooms for the current owner, which is Identity Incorporated. Next, a brief history of the building. Walter and Irma Byrne purchased the lot in 1905 and had local builder Hezekiah Day construct a residence. Walter Byrne owned and operated a grocery store in Old Town until he retired in 1950. Next, Donald and Elizabeth King owned it from 1955 to 95. Donald was a sales manager at Bowman Brothers Milling Company in Old Town for 32 years. He also raised dairy cattle at his family farm along Game Preserve Road and was involved with the Gaithersburg Lions Club, Montgomery County Fair Board, and Grace United Methodist. Elizabeth owned Betty's Beauty Salon and relocated her business to the property in 1956. She was involved with the Gaithersburg Businessmen's Association, the Soroptimist International Club of Upper Montgomery County, Pythian Sisters, and Grace United Methodist. In 1995, the Kings sold the property to Todd and Madeline Roy, and the Roys sold to Identity in 2003. And we already have our next slide up. So here is the timeline of events. In January 2020, there was a fire in the basement. The city condemned the building and it hasn't been occupied since then. In November, Identity had a demolition permit application submitted to the city. They intended to build a new office building on the property, and the demo permit was the first step. The building is 115 years old, and per section 24-231B of the city code, the Historic District Commission is required to review demo permits for non-designated buildings 50 years or older, and they review them for potential historic and cultural significance and architectural and design significance. The HDC has two options in these reviews. First, it can either direct the city manager to issue the demo permit, or it could, if the HDC determines a property is under active consideration as a historic district or has the reasonable probability of being so designated or has been designated, it may direct the city manager to withhold issuance of any demo permit for up to 6 months. The HDC initially reviewed the application at its December meeting, but deferred it to collect more information. We can go to the next page, please. At its January meeting, a majority of commissioners voted the property had reasonable probability for historic designation under 7 of the 10 applicable criteria, and directed the city manager to withhold issuance of the demo permit for 4 months. At last month's meeting, the HDC majority approved the resolution of petition that is before you tonight. Next page, please. These are 3 of the 7 criteria the HDC majority cited in its resolution. The HDC said the building was constructed as part of the growth in Old Town that occurred after arrival of the B&O Railroad and is a representative of that time period of city development. The HDC said some of the previous residents of the property were prominent members of 20th century Gaithersburg society and played roles in shaping the city's direction through their business interests and memberships in local organizations. The building itself was home to Elizabeth King's beauty salon. And the HDC said the building was constructed during a Gaithersburg economic boom when a number of residences and businesses were built proximate to the B&O Railroad station. Go to the next page, please. These are the 4 other criteria they cited. The HDC said the building's architecture is emblematic of a period when the city transitioned from a small community to a commercial hub. The HDC said the builder was a recognizable contractor and left a notable legacy with his residential projects in the city. Enough of his original work remains to showcase his construction skills. And the HDC said the building has stood at its location for more than a century and is an established visual feature. On the other hand, it is staff's opinion that the building lacks the significance under section 24-226B to merit historic designation and does not possess the reasonable probability for designation. The modest building with typical architecture where no historic events took place. The design and craftsmanship are common to the city, and the building was constructed by a local builder, likely with widely copied plans. The setting of the lot has changed with the loss of the outbuildings and the construction of the large parking lot. And though the former owners lived productive lives, the impact of their achievements do not merit historic designation. We can go to the next page, please. This would be the process should the council vote to accept the HDC's petition tonight. There would be a triple public hearing tentatively scheduled for April 5th, followed by recommendations by the HDC and Planning Commission with final action at the May 17th Mayor and Council meeting. And next page, please. So tonight, what is before you is a petition to begin the process to designate 414 East Diamond individually. A property can also be designated as part of a historic district. The standard for an individual designation is often a higher threshold to meet than for just a district. The HDC has also expressed a desire in the future to petition you to initiate the designation process to create an East Diamond Avenue historic district that includes the other properties along the road built as residences in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So staff also seeks input from the mayor and council as to its receptiveness toward a potential historic district along East Diamond and what information it may want beforehand. And next page, please. And this is my final slide. It is about what exactly designation involves. So for a designated property, either individually historic or as part of a district, exterior alterations first require a historic area work permit and often an HDC review. Changes must conform with preservation design guidelines and city preservation code. Demolition can be approved under the circumstances listed under the second bullet point. And I can give you a number of reasons of the benefits of historic preservation, but the essentials are summarized in the third bullet. And finally, an historic property is at the very least eligible for the county's historic tax credit, currently at 25%. It may also be eligible for state and federal historic tax credits. Are there any questions?
Thank you for the presentation, Chris, and for all your work on this. And I thank everyone who testified on the matter. This is a rare case where HDC and staff, where something's coming before us with a clear disagreement between the way the HDC commissioners are seeing it and the way staff is seeing it. I note HDC is saying there's a reasonable probability that this property will be found to have historic value. But generally, like that statement, that assertion would be based on expectations of what the staff investigation will come up with about that property. In this case, staff has already investigated it and made the determination, staff's opinion, that it's not I forget what the legal term is, but of historic value. So from the HDC standpoint, what information do they expect more to come to light, given that the investigation has already happened and given staff this opinion?
Well, I think the HDC is comfortable with the information it has right now, that there is the reasonable probability, but there's always the chance that further research could reveal more information. We feel comfortable that Thanks to Gaithersburg historian and resident Judy Christensen. She's provided a great deal of information, and we feel that she's provided more than enough to make a sound judgment.
Understood. Okay, I'm going to go to Neil.
All right, thank you, Mayor, and thanks to the HDC and city staff for all their work on this one. So I actually sat at home and watched the live presentation and meeting of the HDC where this was discussed. And I'd like to bring out a few points that weren't covered already in the discussion. One is that only 2 years ago, the city's master plan for historic districts covered what was historic, what was potentially historic, and what might come up someday, and what wasn't historic. And this stretch of East Diamond was not considered prospectively historic, but was in that third category of might be something that we want to talk about someday, but is not currently in the master plan as something that is considered to be a historic district. The HDC seemed to take the position that they wanted to go ahead and designate it, which seemed to take staff somewhat aback at the time, but at any rate, seemed to me to be a little outside the purview of the HDC, which seemed to be taking an opportunistic point of view of, we're looking at this one property, so let's look at the whole street. And the second point that was made, and Frank Johnson is online right now, so he can probably explain it, but he went through the legal code that applies to this particular case, because what's happened here is it only came before the HDC because there was a fire, the building was condemned, and Identity is looking for a demolition permit so they can demolish the building and build a new headquarters on the site. The law, as I understand it, says that the HDC can consider a building's historic property when a demolition permit comes forward, as long as it was already in the process of being considered historic. In other words, you can't take a building that's under historic consideration and demolish it before they finish making their decision. But in this case, the HDC has taken the position that because the demolition permit came to them, it triggered the ability to consider whether it's historic or not, which is not what Frank Johnson's interpretation of the law is. Frank, am I interpreting this correctly?
Well, the two standards that need to be considered in holding up a demo permit are not the same necessarily as designation. And I think Chris has gone through the details of the designation decision, which was in February. But I think you're referencing the discussion about holding up the permit. And that does require, there are really two standards. One is it's in the process of being considered, and this is under the city code. That is that it's under active consideration. I think it ended up being fairly clear that the property was not. So then the standard was, is there a reasonable probability? The standard of reasonable probability is somewhat of a subjective determination because it's the mayor and city council that have to designate, and there has to be some judgment there. But Councilmember Harris is correct. There was some discussion, particularly at the February meeting, as to the options and what the meaning was and the purpose of that ordinance. And there was discussion as to the main point being not necessarily to take an opportunistic point of view, but where a building was under consideration or where there was, and again, there does have to be a fair judgment, a reasonable probability. And there was some disagreement. Ultimately, the resolution did cite reasonable probability as opposed to any other basis. So legally, the basis was the one that was really available to the HTC, but some of the discussions and weighing what's the overall purpose, I think Chris touched on some of that in his process as well. But it was, Councilmember Harris is correct. There was some discussion at the HTC about that.
All right, thanks. So basically after viewing that and reading through the evidence that's in the packet, my feeling is that it's a bit of an overreach for this property to be at this juncture declared a historic on the basis that it, came before the HDC on the basis that it was condemned due to a fire. It wasn't on any of the city's plans to make it historic anytime soon. The staff's investigation indicated that it's not a particularly significant building or housed significant events or people. And therefore, my feeling is that the petition should not be allowed to go forward and that the building should be allowed to be rebuilt accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. We'll go to Lorianne and then Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Chris and Frank, for the presentation and remarks. I saw that on the same street, there are about 5 other similar properties, and they have not been designated by the HDC as of yet.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, and so, I would agree with Neil. There are similar properties. Identity is one of our partner organizations, and for them not to be able to continue providing the services or to spend money during this downturn in the economy, when our residents need it the most, to pay for rent at a neighboring property instead of fixing up the property that they currently were occupying. It just seems like a lot of wasted time, and want to make sure that we can get our partners back up and running and get this project back, get these improvements done if they need to demolish the property. So not sure if we're expected to take a vote to not move forward, or if we're just having a discussion this evening.
Yeah, I guess what would happen is we don't take a vote. We just don't take a vote to introduce or to begin the process.
Okay.
Did you have more, Lorianne, or should I go to Ryan?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, we'll go to Ryan.
I just wanted to follow up on that last comment you made, Mayor. I don't know if that's correct or not. I didn't see whether Lynn and Frank were nodding their heads or not. So if we decided we wanted to respectfully reject the petition from the HDC, we would not have to vote to reject it. We just wouldn't have a vote either way. Does that leave the matter kind of floating out there, though?
Yeah, I mean, you would have either options. You could choose just not to take action. In that case, it would not move forward. Or if you did want to specifically, make a motion not to move forward with designation at this time, is something you could do as well.
Lorianne, oh, sorry, Ryan, you weren't done.
No.
Okay, go ahead, Ryan. We'll come back to Lorianne.
Thanks, Mayor. I agree with my colleagues. I too followed the proceedings in the HDC, and I watched the entirety of the most recent HDC meeting discussing this issue. And I want to say at the outset, I appreciate the care and the passion with which our HDC members approach their subject matter, but I respectfully disagree with the interpretation of the applicable statute that the majority of the commission followed. I agree with our assistant city attorney that the designation of this property was not under active consideration at the time, and I think everybody pretty much agrees to that. But I also feel that there was not a reasonable probability at the time that the mayor and city council were going to designate this property. And I know that in our background materials, we have the 2005 Old Town Master Plan document, which I will note was a document that was created before any of the current council members, even Councilmember Sesma, had actually joined the council. But there's a distinction here. If you look at that document, there's a recommended heritage area, but not any formal request for creation of a historic district or designation of any properties there. And in any event, I don't think it was binding. But given the fact that we haven't designated this property since that master plan came about, in the 16 years since then, I think is pretty telling, particularly as to the reasonable probability standard. And regardless, I think this is not the right procedure for designation in the midst of a pending demolition permit, given that it doesn't, in my view, meet the conditions of reasonable probability under section 24-231. But separately, I also agree with the planning staff's thorough research and analysis concluding that this property does not warrant designation on the merits. And as Frank said, those are actually two separate tests. And in my view, I don't think we meet either of those tests. And so it could fail for either reason, but in my view, it fails for both reasons. And finally, even if I'm wrong about all the procedural issues that got us here, because the mayor and council has the ultimate say over designation, and because we have the discretion to consider other factors as well, which the HDC does not. And so we are in a bit of a different posture than the HDC is in terms of considering these issues. Priorities such as economic development and the other needs of our community also weigh in favor of the mayor and council denying the petition. And that alone is also enough to deny the petition. So there's sort of several different avenues by which we get to the same result. And so with respect to the HDC's care and passion for its work, I agree with my colleagues that we should either not accept the petition or perhaps take an affirmative vote to reject the petition.
All right, we're gonna thank you, Ryan. We'll go back to Lorianne, and then anybody else who wants to speak, and then or if someone wants to make a motion, we'll go to that. But Lorianne, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to introduce the motion to reject the petition that was introduced.
Okay, Neil.
I would like to second that motion.
Okay, before we vote, does anybody want to say anything, or shall we just raise your hand if you want to say something? Otherwise, I'm going to the vote. Okay, Mike.
Yeah, I find the arguments presented by my colleagues here much more compelling than the case made by the HDC, though I have great respect for their work and their commitment to the issues that they deal with on a regular basis. I think the biggest issue for me is that this house, this address, and this house or building, and the buildings close by are not on the list of resources, potential historic resources that the city should look to preserve and designate. So if it was, I think, I might feel differently about that. But I think the cascading set of conditions that haven't been met, I think, are reason enough to decline to support the petition, which I think that was the motion that was introduced.
Yep, it's a motion to not accept the petition. And so I'll Rob Wu, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a little bit more to add to that is that kind of the circumstances here, as Ryan was articulating, are driving in favor of my vote here today is why now? Why in 2021 when this property and properties all along that row were eligible in the 1960s? And you look at the history of that area, you see parcels of property that have buildings on them that date from the late 70s to the early 80s. So there was decisions made in the 70s and 80s with respect to parcels in that area. And I can only surmise by the partitioning of those parcels that those were formerly houses and probably houses of a similar vintage. And then you've got the uses in this area where you've got the base structure, but, particularly across the street from 414, you've got one of the older houses in the area, but it's completely encapsulated by a newer building. And so I'm kind of curious to find out more about what the Historic District Commission is thinking with respect to the other places in this area. And that's kind of weighing, that kind of gives me some hesitancy with respect to, do we want to take a more holistic view at the historic nature of this area? But it seems that over time, this area, there's been a conscious, I guess, either avoidance or, the things that have occurred on adjacent properties is what is driving my vote here. Is that over time this has kind of lost its character there, and there's been decisions made to lose that character, and we're just coming up right now on one property, and only in 2021 thinking about the historic character of this entire area.
All right, so we have a motion and a second on the table to not accept the petition. I will call the roll. All in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Sesma.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember Sales.
Aye.
And Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Okay, carries unanimously. The petition is not accepted, and we will move on. Thank you, Frank. And thank you, Chris. And we will move on to the next agenda item, which is consolidated policy discussions. And let's see who we're calling up. We're calling up Caroline Seiden. And I will thank her in advance for her patience, for waiting till 10:20 at night to begin this consolidated policy discussion. Go ahead, Caroline.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. It's good to see everybody. This, we can pull up the first slide, page 152. This is a consolidated policy discussion for schematic development plan application SDP 8597-2020 and environmental waiver ENV 8657-2020. Next slide. The subject property shown on the screen is known as 700 North Frederick Avenue. The property is generally bounded by I-270 to the southwest, Montgomery Village, which is Maryland 124 to the southeast, North Frederick Avenue, Maryland 355 to the northeast, and a warehouse located at 800 North Frederick Avenue to the northwest. Primary access to the site is from North Frederick Avenue, and the property is zoned MXD. The subject property is currently developed with approximately 500,000 square feet of office space, associated parking, bioretention ponds, and open areas. Site was originally developed for IBM and most recently vacated by Leidos. Next slide. The applicant, Matten, filed an SDP application on September 15th, 2020, and requests approval for the construction of 461,100, my slide is off by 100 square feet, of commercial, employment, industrial development, recreational, and open spaces, and an infrastructure plan to accommodate future development. Next slide. Property owners received approval of sketch plan SK 8180-2019 in 2019 for commercial, employment, and industrial uses, and allows up to 650,000 square feet of development split over 2 blocks, equating to an FAR of approximately 0.34 over 44 acres. Sketch plan permits up to 10% of the redeveloped floor area as retail commercial uses and up to 100% of employment, office, or other commercial and institutional uses. The current SDP application implements and conforms with this approved sketch plan. Next slide. A virtual joint public hearing for the application was held on December 21st, 2020. 2 members of the public provided oral testimony at the hearing. Comments discussed by the mayor and city council, the planning commission, and the public during the public hearing related to the use of mezzanine space in the flex buildings, the quality of the flex building architecture, the phasing of development, the necessity for environmental waiver and the tree variance requests, and their sustainability plans. In response to the joint public hearing discussions, the applicant has submitted a supplemental response letter, which is Exhibit 72, and has also submitted revised plans. The Planning Commission closed their record on January 27th, 2021, and made a recommendation on February 3rd, 2021. Planning Commission recommended approval for the SDP application with 2 conditions. In addition to the conditions, the Planning Commission voiced their expression about the flex building architecture. The council's record closed at 5 p.m. on February 12th, 2021. No additional public testimony was received after the joint public hearing, and there are currently 93 exhibits in the record. Next slide. So the staff presentation tonight will provide an overview of the plan with a specific focus on the public hearing discussion and the applicant's responses to those comments. This is the overall site plan. The project proposes 2 retail commercial buildings in the 2 rectangular buildings in orange along the property's North Frederick Avenue frontage. They're retail commercial buildings adjacent to the North Frederick Avenue frontage are the smaller buildings. They are intended to serve as a convenient and attractive amenity for the employers, as well as the employees in the project's 2 flex buildings, which are the larger orange buildings, as well as for nearby residents. Next slide. This is an aerial rendering that was provided at the joint public hearing, just to give you an overview of the site. You can see the 2 flex buildings in kind of the more background, and in the foreground, the retail buildings and the linear park along North Frederick Avenue. Next slide. This is lot 1. There's a 6,100 square foot retail building with associated automobile filling station proposed on lot 1 as permitted for block B under the sketch plan. The square footage of the building has increased by 500 square feet since the initial SDP application, but it remains well within the cap on retail square footage for this portion of the site. Next slide. Lot 4 has a 5,000 square foot restaurant use proposed. The plan for this lot includes a drive-through designed in accordance with the city's best practices for drive-throughs. Next slide. So the centerpiece of the project is 2 centrally located flex buildings, each expected to contain approximately 225,000 square feet of gross floor area. The buildings are designed to accommodate a wide potential range of commercial, employment, industrial uses as approved in the sketch plan, including integrated light manufacturing, research and development, laboratories, office, distribution warehousing, and several other uses. The flex buildings are oriented around an interior loading area, which will be shielded from view by decorative walls on both ends of each building. In its joint public hearing response letter, the applicant elaborated on the discussion raised at the joint public hearing regarding the potential for mezzanine space in each building. According to the applicant, the clear heights of the flex building is about 50 feet and allows for the accommodation of approximately 25,000 square feet of mezzanine space in each building. This square footage is already reflected in the total gross square footage proposed for the flex buildings, and the mezzanine space could accommodate either mechanical or office and lab space depending on the needs of individual tenants. Because no tenants have been identified to date, it is undetermined how much mezzanine space will ultimately be developed. The building's tilt-up concrete design permits flexibility for such mezzanine spaces, and the final square footage and parking requirements will be determined at final site plan and through subsequent amendments to the final site plan as the tenant mix changes over time. Staff is comfortable that despite the lack of clarity at this time regarding the demand and use of the mezzanine space, there is enough flexibility in the parking requirements to accommodate the maximum proposed mezzanine space. And furthermore, the mezzanine spaces could provide opportunities for enhanced architectural design elements, which we would encourage. Next slide. We didn't talk too much at the joint public hearing about the circulation, but I wanted to bring it up because it's important to understanding how everything circulates. The primary site access is at North Frederick Avenue in the same location as an existing full movement signalized intersection. A secondary right-in, right-out access at parcel A is provided as well. And in total, there are 4 pedestrian access points from North Frederick Avenue into this site, which was in its previous condition was closed to the public. In addition to the 2 entrance roads, the applicant has provided a north-south interior roadway designed to both separate the retail uses from the flex buildings and also to distribute vehicular and pedestrian traffic between the various lots. Although roads will remain private, the site utilizes the city's commercial service road typology for the primary access point, including 8-foot sidewalks, 12-foot planting strips, and a median. A secondary access point and the interior road that bisects the project are also proposed to be built to various configurations of the commercial service road standard, each providing 6-foot sidewalks and planting strips. No road code waivers are required. Staff is supportive of the circulation plan and is pleased that the redevelopment of the property provides multiple new pedestrian and other non-vehicular access points to and through a previously access restricted site. And we are also appreciative that the applicant has designed its roads in accordance with the city's current road code standards. Next slide. The applicant's amenity spaces and green areas remain unchanged from the joint public hearing. The applicant has also provided supplemental letters in support of their environmental waiver request and tree removal variance. The environmental and stormwater management staff has worked closely with the applicant on these issues and is comfortable that both the waiver and tree variance requests are the minimal necessary to redevelop the site, and that redevelopment actually serves to improve the environmental quality of the site, adding an additional 2.29 acres of tree canopy, removing some impervious surface, replacing existing lawn panels with trees, and increasing the naturalized area. Stream Valley Buffer will be placed under a Category 1 forest conservation easement as well. Next slide. So these are some of the applicants' renderings of some of the amenity spaces. Consistent with the sketch plan and the Frederick Avenue Corridor Master Plan, the project provides for the continuation of the planned Frederick Avenue Linear Park. The park incorporates an 8-foot shared path, numerous plantings along the property's North Frederick Avenue frontage with shade trees, ornamental trees, and landscape planting beds to create a linear park and a welcoming presence along an important city commercial corridor. Staff is pleased that the applicant plans to develop the entire linear park in this phase of development, providing a long-planned amenity to the Northern Employment District. Next slide. During the joint public hearing, concerns were raised about the quality of design of the flex buildings. Given the prominent location of these buildings, the mayor and council and the planning commission voiced concerns regarding the lack of glazing and windows, the warehouse style of the buildings, the quality of the materials, and the continuity of design across the development. In response to these concerns, the applicant has submitted revised illustrative renderings and preliminary building elevations and has also provided additional guidance within the revised design guidelines to address these concerns. So this slide, you can see the kind of the before is the blue building and after is the one on the bottom. Next slide. The revised architecture for the flex buildings provides additional articulation to reduce mass, bulk, and uniformity. Facades have been updated to include a masonry aesthetic. In addition to the masonry texture, color variation, and pattern, building facades are further articulated by using horizontal metal extrusions. Additionally, entryways have been enhanced with diverse design elements and a range of building materials that include additional glass, metal panels, and surface texture and detailing. Opportunities for additional glazing and fenestration at other locations in the building facade are contingent upon tenant operations. Staff is encouraged by the revised preliminary architecture and believes it represents a substantial improvement over the originally proposed elevations. The revised architecture is significantly more interesting, contemporary in style, less industrial, and provides a more interesting mix of materials, glazing, and pedestrian scale features. The improvements in the building articulation helps to break the massing of an otherwise extremely long building facade. The variations in height and materials at the pedestrian entrances also contributes to the reduction of the monolithic massing of the flex buildings. As tenants fit out portions of these buildings, staff would encourage the applicant to seek all opportunities for additional pedestrian scale entrance features and mezzanine glazing to ensure that the final building product meets the goals of the preliminary design and projects a visually interesting facade. Next slide. In response to questions about architectural continuity between the flex buildings and the commercial buildings on lots 1 and 4, the applicant has provided a sample building perspective for a future building that reflects the building materials and design patterns established for lots 5 and 6. The applicant has also noted that design guidelines set standards for a variety of design elements, including patterns of scale, form, materials, and proportion, to assist in establishing a consistent form of development, both internally within the project as well as externally with the surrounding Northern Employment District. Visual continuity will also be achieved through site design, including project furnishings, wayfinding, lighting, and signage. Although staff does not believe that all buildings on the property need to match to be considered compatible, the inclusion of building materials identified for use in the flex buildings into the facades of the commercial structures on lots 1 through 4 is highly encouraged. Additionally, the design guidelines will ensure continuity in design across the project. Next slide. In response to several inquiries at the joint public hearing regarding sustainability practices, the applicant has included a description of its planned practices in its response memo. The applicant anticipates providing electronic vehicle charging stations with solar panels, a cool roof designed to reflect sunlight, LED lamps for all interior and exterior lighting, low flow plumbing, and low E glass. The applicant also notes that through the addition of 230 new trees, the tree canopy on the site will be increased by 2.29 acres. Additionally, the applicant estimates that approximately 42% of the building materials to be demolished from the existing structures on site will be recycled for use on site during the construction of the project's flex buildings and related site work, with an additional 31% of materials to be recycled at a local recycling center. Next slide. Nope, that's the end of it. We can go back one slide, I apologize. Staff would encourage the applicant to continue to seek additional sustainability measures through the final site plan stage of development, including solar panels on parking fields, additional sustainable building materials, and the recycling is a significant amount of material from the existing buildings is also an important effort. Finally, I just wanted to mention that this SDP is considered to be proposed in one phase, but implemented over multiple final site plans. And the applicant anticipates coming in very shortly with their first final site plan, which will be the development of lots 5 and 6, the flex buildings, along with all of the infrastructure, all of the amenities, all of the public facilities, including the entire linear park in the first site plan. And a preliminary lotting plan identifies parcels H and J for future schematic development plans, noting that existing improvements on those parcels will be demolished and the area stabilized with lawn at this stage. The applicant further notes in its response letter that 38.89 acres of the total 43.96 acres, or about 88.5% of the property's land area, are to be developed under the current schematic development plan. Staff is supportive of the submitted schematic development plan, SDP 8597-2020. The plan meets and accomplishes the purposes, objectives, and minimal standards and requirements of the MXD zone. Additionally, the proposed plan furthers the visions and goals of the city master plan by providing additional employment opportunities in the North Frederick Avenue corridor. The development will also provide a larger tax base, which will generate additional revenue to support the city's economy. Development will not adversely affect the character of the surrounding neighborhood. The proposed preliminary architecture and design guidelines ensure that the project will be of a superior quality and compatible and harmonious with the surrounding neighborhoods. Staff has reviewed the applicant's revised plans and is of the opinion that the questions raised by both the mayor and city council and the planning commission, as well as the public, have been adequately addressed. And as I mentioned earlier, in your packet is the February 3rd, 2021 recommendation for approval by the Planning Commission. And there are 2 draft resolutions also in your package, one for SDP 8597-2020 and one for ENV 8657-2020 that would each require separate motions for final action if you so choose. And I will be happy to answer any questions.
Caroline, thank you very much for the presentation. This is policy discussion. I'm gonna just be very quick about it since it's late. I think this seems like a good plan. I think I want to congratulate the applicant and staff working with the applicant for the improvements, the considerable improvements in architecture, which I think are really important for this particular spot because it's so visible. And so I would be supportive of both the plan and the waiver. We'll go to Mike.
Thank you, Judd. Yes, Caroline, I agree. Nice presentation. This is a much improved plan. Clearly, the applicant's been very responsive to our suggestions. I just had one question about the parking fields and the impervious surfaces they represent, as well as the buildings. Are there active measures or engineering to reduce some of that impervious surface by using pervious paving materials or anything like that in terms of managing stormwater runoff?
The parking lots are impervious surface. To my knowledge, our Public Works Department has not really supported the use of some more permeable pavers for parking surfaces. I know there have been some issues and discussions about that, but this plan, the parking lots are asphalt. They have a stormwater plan. They have a lot of small bioretention areas to capture a lot of the runoff on site in some of the employee amenity areas. But the parking lots all have landscape islands and meet our 10% landscaping requirement for the parking lots.
So do the landscape islands represent areas for bioretention as well?
I don't think in the parking lots themselves, but I think they're in the employee amenity areas. There are those bioretention areas.
I guess I would encourage the applicant to think about those things going forward. I know, these aren't final plans, but I think every opportunity they have to as a small demonstration project about how they could do something to reduce the impact of the large parking fields. That's it. Other than that, I find this, I'm in agreement with Judd.
All right, thank you, Mike. We'll go to Rob.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you, Carolyn, for the presentation. Just a question regarding the green space, open space that's provided in the SDP. Is the parcel on my cell phone, parcel H and parcel J are not part of this SDP application, but are they included in the green space, open space requirements, or are they excluded? I'm looking.
Yeah, they will be the subject of their own SDP in the future.
Okay, so when it says 16.76 acres, I couldn't tell from the green shading or not as to whether or not those were included as part of the open space or green space calculation.
No, those parcels will be developed, so they would not be part of the green space requirement. I mean, they may contribute to it in the future, but they're not counted as part of the green space.
And as far as simplistic terms, I read, being a simplistic person, I read the memo with respect to stormwater management to be that the waiver is being requested to build a stormwater feature that will improve our ability to mitigate the impacts into the stream. Is that accurate?
They, in order to accommodate all of the stormwater, they need to have an outfall that protrudes into an area that it didn't previously. They cannot, the pond that exists cannot accommodate all of the stormwater. So I know it's just preliminary at this point. So we got a kind of a more general memo from our stormwater staff to explain that at this stage, the details of that have not yet been determined, that they approve it preliminarily, just the concept of it, and the details of it will come at final.
Okay, but the outfall is a mitigation measure. So if you didn't have the outfall, you wouldn't necessarily have the encroachment. So you would just have native water coming off site into the stream valley buffer. So it's an actual mitigation construction that is driving the need for that specific aspect of the environmental waiver. Is that fair?
That sounds about right.
Simplistic, fair. Last question is, I know parcel H and parcel J aren't part of this application, but in meeting the minimum green space, open space requirements, it seems that the applicant has satisfied that with the current application. Is that correct?
They have, yes.
Okay. Is there any way for us, this may be a Lynn question, is there any way for us to place green space, open space requirements on parcel H or parcel J, or are we pretty much constrained to them being able to put it, a building in a parking lot in those areas? Meaning when the applicant gets around to developing parcel H and parcel J, is there any mechanism we can put in place to preserve localized green space in those areas?
I mean, that would be part of that particular application. That couldn't be a condition for the approval of the SDP that's before you.
Okay. And so when H and J come up for consideration, what would be the green space requirements, if any, for those two parcels?
Well, the green space requirement in the MXD zone is 25%.
Which they've met, my understanding is which they've met for this entire parcel, the two parcels that ultimately make this macro project. There wouldn't be a separate 25% green space, open space requirement for parcel H and parcel J, is my understanding.
I guess we would have to look at the overall parcel as a whole.
However we can do it, maybe it's a recommendation. I would like to see micro level green space on parcel H and parcel J. I don't know how you do that.
Are you proposing an additional condition on this
That's
approval?
a future SDP.
Yeah, I mean, but the green space requirement for parcel H and parcel J are part of this phase 1 and phase 2, meaning they can satisfy green space requirements on this phase 1 portion and have 0 green space requirements on parcel H and parcel J, even though because they've broken up the SDP applications into these specific parcels. Ordinarily, they would have considered the entire site, and there would be green space requirements possibly met through those parcels, but because of the way
They're still going to have to get another SDP through. So
yeah.
I assume that they would include that kind of amenity if they
Well,
wanted it.
the question is there any requirement for them to include that amenity?
So is this a Lynn question?
Kind of a Lynn question.
Well,
I mean, the question is if they meet the overall standards with the current SDP, then they meet the standards. I mean, we can't require them to meet the standards under the current plan and then in a future plan require them to meet additional standards if it's not part of the ordinance.
Therein lies the problem. I mean, yeah, Ryan, the other lawyer.
Sorry, I'm being a little overeager here. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, if I may. So we have the ability to impose additional conditions on a future SDP for those 2 additional lots, whether or not they say, we meet the minimum requirement. We can still impose additional conditions under those SDPs for those separate lots that might require, as your hypothetical, Rob, additional, micro green spaces or pocket parks or other things that we want to include as a condition, right?
I assume you're not asking me, but you're asking
Yeah,
them.
yes,
I'm asking
yes,
staff
that-
because,
yeah,
I mean,
that is correct. Yeah.
That
even
was
if-
my point.
yeah,
When I
even if
said-
the applicant says,
Yeah.
we've met the minimum requirement, in general, we can say that's very nice, but we're still going to make these conditions and requirements for the other STPs.
Okay,
Does that address your concern?
that's a Lynn or to me? Yeah, so, okay, that is a concern I have right now is that because of the phasing H and J, I would like to see green spacing, and to the extent we can suggest to the developer that they make those considerations.
Rob,
Come on.
it's kind of, it's fine if you want to vote against this, but
I'm not.
this is an impractical time to be bringing this up.
Mine isn't working as fast.
This is a seriously impractical time to be bringing this up, but okay. Who wants to speak next? Lorianne, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So thank you, Caroline, for the presentation. I am pleased to see some of the improvements to the project with some of the green infrastructure that they've introduced with the electronic vehicle charging station, the solar panels, and the additional trees. I just, I don't know if it was just the stormwater the stormwater infrastructure that was going to be the adequate mitigation of the impacts. Was that the only improvement?
I'm not sure if I understand the only improvement to.
Well, they're asking for an environmental waiver. And so what remedies are they putting in place to
Well, they're putting the entire area under a forest conservation into a forest conservation area. They're adding a lot of tree canopy. Some of their environmental waivers are temporary to remove part of the path that is there now. So they'll actually be improving the environmental area there, but they need the waiver in order to remove the path.
And so are they also going to be removing trees in this?
There's a request to remove 9 trees. That's the tree variance request, which is separate from the environmental waiver.
Okay. Are any of these natives?
They are. Some of them are not in good shape, and that's in one of their supplemental letters. If I can find my page number, I could refer to it. In order to do some of the construction, they need to remove some of the trees, and then they're replanting, I think, more than 200 trees in its place. But there are 9 specimen trees that they are proposing to remove.
Okay, and then my last question. Now I've lost track. No, I had a question about the distribution warehouse. Are there any more specifics about that part of the project that was mentioned?
Well, those 2 flex buildings could be any number of different tenants, and my understanding is they do not know who those tenants are yet. So there may be some that are distribution warehouse uses, there may be biotech uses, there may be offices. It could be any number of different tenants. So we don't have more information on specifically who will be in those buildings at this point. They're being built without knowing who the tenants are.
Okay, that's all I have for now.
Okay, Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I just want to say I think the applicant did a nice job improving the proposed flex building exterior design, and I appreciate that. Personally, I'm not thrilled about the particular proposed retail uses along North Frederick Avenue. or totally thrilled about the potential vehicle traffic flow issues that I see, but I understand that the traffic flow meets the requirements that we have in the city and that the retail uses are allowed uses under the concept plan. And I'm willing to go along with it in light of the broader benefit of this SDP and the value of the flex space buildings and the hope that the remaining undeveloped parcels that we talked about earlier fronting North Frederick Avenue might be developed with some more attractive designs and uses in a future phase, but we'll deal with that in the future. I had some questions also about the environmental waiver, and I know that we had some comments from the public in the record at the joint public hearing and some supplemental materials that were submitted after the joint public hearing, asking whether the environmental waiver was unnecessarily generous. But I think Caroline has already done a good job answering my colleagues' questions about that and sort of explaining how the overall design with the added plantings and the need to accommodate and mitigate the stormwater runoff is actually sort of offsetting some of the impacts of the activity that requires the waiver, and more than offsetting it, as I understand it. So I think that helps to address that issue and why there's a need for a waiver there. So I just wanted to say that, but that's where I am, and I'm ready to vote for this SDP.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Neil, did you want to say anything?
Nothing that hasn't already been said. As Brian just said, I don't love the retail design of what looks like a gas station and a drive-through fast food restaurant on North Frederick, but I understand why the applicant is going in that direction. And now that we've talked through it, I understand the need for the environmental waivers and what the applicant has done to offset that. So I'm prepared to move forward.
All right, so do you want to make the motion on the, or I see Ryan's hand. Ryan, do you want to say anything?
Well, just one last thing. I know that the Planning Commission recommended those conditions, and I just wanted to clarify whether staff was recommending that in our motion, we include those couple of conditions that they had recommended as well.
Yes, please. They are in the draft resolution
They
as
are.
well.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, if it's okay with the mayor, I'll move the draft of the SDP that we have before us with the conditions recommended by the Planning Commission.
Okay, Neil.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, I will call the roll. All those in favor say aye, any opposed say nay. Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Sesma.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
Councilmember Sales.
Aye.
Okay, and then we have the matter of the waiver. Let me just go to that page. Would someone like to make a motion on the waiver? Mike, please.
I'll move the request for a waiver. Approval of the request for the waiver. Do I need this ENV 8657-2020?
We knew we would do that. Go ahead, Lorianne.
Second.
Okay, I will call the roll. All those in favor say aye, any opposed say nay. Councilmember Harris.
Aye.
Councilmember Sesma.
Aye.
Councilmember Spiegel.
Aye.
Councilmember Wu.
Aye.
And Councilmember Sales. Lorianne, I didn't hear you. Do that one more time. Aye, okay, good. All right, that carries unanimously. Caroline, thank you very much. It's getting late. Do we have anything from the city attorney?
I have nothing additional this evening.
Okay, and I haven't heard anything from Dennis, so I'm assuming we don't have anything from any other staff at this point. So then I will remind everybody for the next 2 weeks, we have work sessions. Next week on the stormwater fee, the following week on the racial equity discussion, and then the next regular meeting of the mayor and council is on April 5th. Lorianne, I see your finger. What do you?
I saw Dennis appear, so I didn't know if he had something to add.
Dennis, do you have something to add?
I do not.
Okay, good. Then we haven't missed anything. And as Ryan said, happy Passover, happy Easter, and until next time, let's do great things, Gaithersburg. We are adjourned.